What you're seeing here is not a pre-recorded video. This is an actual live stream of me playing Spider-Man 2 on my PS5, which I've connected to this Next.js application that you are going to build. So without further ado, let's go over all the things that you will learn in this tutorial. As you can see, we have a nice stream player with volume controls and full screen controls. We also have a clear indicator that this user is live, here in the header, but also in the sidebar where we have other recommended users. We also have the number of viewers looking at the stream in real time, and we can also find out some more information about Code with Antonio. And now let me show you how it looks for the person who is actually streaming. So in here we also have a beautiful homepage with all of the streams here ordered by live first, but as a logged in user and as an active streamer, I have access to my creator dashboard. And in here you can see that we have a similar view, but you can see that I have some different options in my sidebar here, and I can also modify my stream info, giving it a different thumbnail or modifying the title. And I can do the same thing for my bio, like this. And you've probably noticed that we have a little chat here. Both the streamer and the viewer have a chat. So let's go ahead and say, hello, Code with Antonio, like this. And we have a username Antonio sending a message, hello, Code with Antonio, here in real time. And you can see that Code with Antonio in their stream view has immediately received this. So I'm gonna write back, hello, viewer, like this. There we go, both of these in real time, and you can see how each of them has a unique color identifier. So what happens if this Antonio user starts to spam our stream? What we can do as the owner of the stream is go inside of the community, find a user that is misbehaving and initiate a block function, and they are going to be immediately disconnected from the stream. And if they try refreshing, it's going to say 404, we couldn't find the user you were looking for. And as you can see, it's no longer in the recommended tab and it's no longer in the home tab. You can't even find them inside of the search tab right here, no results found. So let's go ahead and see what happens once we unblock the user. So as a streamer, I can go inside of my community settings, find the user that I've blocked, and initiate unblock, like this. And now when this guest tries to refresh, there we go, we can see ourselves here. And now let's go ahead and try and search again. So I'm gonna search for the term Spidey, and there we go, we have 2 live streams including Spider-Man. And now I can go ahead and visit this user again. Great. But here's another thing I can do. In the stream settings here, I can go into the chat settings, and if I want to, I can completely disable the chat. But I can also enable chat delay, and I can enable must be following to chat rule. So now when this guest goes ahead and visits our stream, you can see that they have a notification that followers only and slow mode is enabled, and they can see more information hovering here. So messages are delayed by 3 seconds. Because I'm not following this user, I cannot send a message. So let me go ahead and click follow here. And what happened now is that this changed to 1 follower, and in my sidebar, Code with Antonio went from the recommended tab to the following tab. And now I can go ahead and send a message as a follower. And you can see that it is delayed by 3 seconds. So now it's being sent, exactly as the settings we provided. Great. So what else can we do with this application? Well, you might notice that inside of my sidebars here, I have a little toggle button, which allows me to completely collapse my layout. Let's say I want to hide this sidebar while I'm watching a stream. I can simply click here and there we go. Now it is in collapsed mode. And I can do the same thing for the chat if I don't want to see that while someone is streaming. So now let's go ahead and let's end this stream and see what happens. So here I've prepared my OBS Studio where I'm actually streaming. So this software is connected to my Next.js application. And once I click stop streaming right here, you can see that in a couple of seconds here, this entire stream will go offline like this. Great. And now you're not going to be able to see the live indicator neither in the following, neither in the homepage here. So let's go ahead and this time try to initiate an opposite thing. Instead of Code with Antonio being the streamer, let's go ahead and make this user Antonio stream. What they have to do is go inside of the dashboard here, and they will see their status that they are offline. And now let's go inside of the keys right here, and let's go ahead and click on Generate a Connection. We can select between RTMP connection or a WIP connection, so we can handle multiple streaming software. Let's go ahead and click Generate here, and now this has generated our server URL and our stream key, which is hidden by default, but we can always show it. So just like on real Twitch, we're gonna have proper information to connect to our streaming software. So what I have to do now is copy my server URL, and I have to go inside of my OBS settings. I'm choosing the Stream tab, and I'm gonna go ahead and assign the stream URL here. And now I have to copy my stream key. So let me go ahead and copy that like this, make sure it's the same, click OK, and then I'm going to click Start Streaming. And now, as you can see, I am live as Antonio, as a completely different user, right? And now, once the Code with Antonio refreshes, there we go. You can see that this stream is now live, and I can go ahead and follow this user, and then I can send a message again, and this one will receive it in real time here. This is just a small part of everything that you're going to learn in this application. We're going to have a ton more features, including entire user management, including webhooks, including creating ingresses, a bunch of things that you will learn inside of this tutorial. So without further ado, let's get started. On top of all of that, the entire website is going to be fully responsive on all devices. Everything that you just saw in the demo is going to be covered in this free tutorial. If you're watching on YouTube, you're going to have part 1 and part 2, both for free, uploaded on the channel. That being said, if 14 hours of content is still not enough for you and you want to learn more, or if you want to donate to my channel, you can use the link in the description and look at this content where it says want to learn more. And in here, you can unlock it for a price and get all of these features and everything else that I put here in the future. Let's go ahead and let's set up our Next.js application. First of all, make sure that you have Node.js installed, specifically 18.17 or higher than that. You can check that quite easily by going into your terminal and simply running a command node-v. As you can see, I have a version 20.9, which means that I am okay to proceed with this installation. If you don't have Node installed, or if you have a lower version, you can simply click on this link here to open the Node.js installation page, or you can Google Node. And once you're on this page, I recommend that you install whatever it is long-term support at the time you're watching your video. After you've done that, go ahead and confirm Node-v again and make sure you have the appropriate version. Now we can go ahead and actually install our Next.js application. So let's go ahead and copy this right here, and let's go inside of our terminal and simply paste that function, and after that give your project a name. So I'm gonna call this video Twitch, like this. Go ahead and press enter, select yes for the TypeScript option, yes for ESLint, yes for Tailwind, no for source directory, yes for the app router, and no for customizing the import alias. And now just wait a couple of seconds for this to initialize. After it's been initialized, you can see that we have a success message here and a location of our project. What we have to do now is open that project. So I'm gonna click open here, and there we go. I have a folder, Video Twitch, exactly as I've named my project. If you get this pop-up, feel free to press yes right here. And let's briefly take a look at our project structure now. So we have an app folder, which has globals.css, and inside of here we have some predefined code. You can see we have this root, we have this color scheme here, we have this body element here, and we have Tailwind directives, so we can actually use it inside of our project. Besides that, we have a layout file, which is kind of like a skeleton for our pages and views We're going to talk about this a bit later, right? And here is another important file, page.tsx. So page.tsx is an actual route, right? And let's go ahead and run this project so we can see exactly what's going on here. So let's go inside of our terminal here and do npm run dev. After you've run this application, go ahead inside of your localhost 3000 and you should be seeing a screen similar to this. It might be in light mode for you. For me, it's dark mode because I use that as the default mode on my laptop. For you, it might be light. It doesn't matter. Great. What I want to do now is I want to see how I can modify this page. So let's go inside of the app folder, page.tsx right here. And I want to remove everything that's rendered inside. I don't need any of this big text here. Instead, I want to write a simple paragraph, hello Twitch clone, like that. And now, as you can see, I have a very small text here, so I'm just going to zoom in so you can clearly see it here. What I want to do now is try out whether our Tailwind has been successfully configured in here. So what you can do is give this paragraph a class name of text, red 500, and font bold. Once you save, you can see that my Tailwind is correctly configured, so this is now a red text with a bold font. And if you're wondering how come I have this little color box and how come when I hover on classes I can see this useful pop-up which tells me exactly what is the weight of this bold class, that is because I have an extension called Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. So make sure you search for Tailwind, select the first one and install this package right here. Great, so now that you know how this works, what I want to do next is install Shadcn UI, which is going to be our component library, which we're going to, well, it's not exactly a component library, it is more of a collection of components where we can copy and paste components that we need inside of our project. So what I want you to do is just save this file, make sure everything is saved. You can collapse all of these things, go inside of your terminal here and shut down your application. So make sure your application is not running while you do the next steps. Then what we're going to do is install Shadcn UI. So there we go, as I just corrected myself. So Shadcn is not a component library. It is a collection of reusable components that you can copy and paste inside of our application. So let's go ahead and install that for Next.js. We've already created our project, so we can skip this step. Instead, we can go immediately into the step 2, which is running the CLI. So I'm going to copy this command for npm. I'm going to go inside of my terminal here and I'm just going to paste it. So this is what it looks like and you can just press enter. And now we have to match the options from our initial configuration to this configuration. So we selected yes for TypeScript when we configured our project. So make sure you select yes for TypeScript here as well. It's asking us which style we would like to use. I highly recommend that you go with the default option because that is what I'm going to be using. If you select New York, it's going to look slightly different and you're also going to have some different packages installed. So for the sake of following this tutorial, select the default option and just press enter. For the color, go ahead and select neutral. It's asking us where is our global CSS file, and you can clearly see that it is right here in the app folder globals.css. So this is correct. Don't worry if the text is cut out. So this is just a placeholder. You can press enter. You can see that once I pressed enter, it's been correctly found here. Now it's asking whether we want to use CSS variables for colors. Select yes here. And here's the thing we have to modify. So it's asking us where is our tailwind.config located. And for me, it's asking where is tailwind.config.js located. And in here I have a placeholder again for .js. If you have it for .ts by chance, if you're watching this into the future, it could be that this has been modified and you don't have to do anything here. But for the rest of us, which have this little issue here, we have to modify this to target the .ts file and not .js file. It's not going to be a problem if you press enter here. You're just going to have one unnecessary file. So let's go ahead and resolve that. So very easily, you can see in our file explorer here that I don't have tailwind.config.js. I have tailwind.config.ts. So I simply have to tell this command line interface to target that file instead. And instead of clicking enter here, what I'm going to do is press the tab option. And then you can see how this placeholder now turned into text, and I can delete .js and enter .ts and just press enter. The alias for components is correct. You can press enter here. Same for libutils. And now it's asking us whether we want to use React Server components. So the answer for that is yes, because we are working with App Router in this project. And now you have to confirm all of that config, so just press enter or Y. And wait for a second for all of that to install. Perfect. And now let's go ahead and run our project again to see what has changed. So let me just refresh this. And for me, what's changed is that I went from dark mode to light mode. So if you were already on light mode, I'm not sure that you're actually going to see any difference. But if you were like me and on dark mode, now everything is light by default, right? So what I want to practice now is how to add a component from Shadcn library inside of our project. We can do that quite easily by going inside of the components here. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Go ahead and find the component you like from this Shadcn UI library, for example, button component. And what we're going to do is we're going to run this installation command. So npx Shadcn UI latest add button. So go ahead and copy this for npm. Let's go back inside of our terminal here. You can either shut down the app and run the command, or you can click on this little plus icon here, so you have two terminals running. And inside of this second one, I'm gonna paste this. So npx Shadcn UI at latest add button, and just press enter like this, and that's gonna install the button. That is it. We now have our very own button component. So again, make sure you have at least one terminal running here, and let's take a look at that button component. So inside of our project, we now have a components folder, UI folder, and inside button.tsx folder right here. And you can see how this is literally copying and pasting some code inside to enable us to have a button, and it is built on top of Radix UI. What's great about this is that it gives us complete ownership and control of our button. No matter how heavy we want to modify our button, we can do that because we have the source code to that button. You can see that we have the exact sizes in pixels, everything we need, from borders to roundedness to colors to variants. We can modify and rename anything we want here. So Shadcn is perfect for building your own component library, which is what we're going to be needing for our Twitch clone. So let's go ahead now inside of our app folder, inside of page.tsx right here, and instead of rendering a paragraph, I actually want to import that button component, and I can do that by importing it from /components/UI button. So exactly the place we were at, and inside I'm gonna right click me like this, and we can remove this image import. We no longer need that. So let's revisit our localhost, and there we go. So I of course zoomed in my page. Yours is probably much smaller than mine, but this is what that button looks like. And let's go ahead and play around with it a little bit. So we can give it a size of small, for example, and now it's a bit smaller. We can enlarge it by giving it a size of large. We can also change the variant. For example, let's give it a variant of destructive. Now it looks like a danger button, something we would use to delete a record. And we can also play around with ghost variants and some other variants that it has, right? But here's the cool thing. Let's go ahead and let's revisit our button component. So UI button right here. Inside of this button variants, which you're seeing right here, inside of this object where we just have all of those variants listed, you can clearly see the exact CSS that is applied every time you add one of those variants to your button. And the cool thing about it is that nothing is stopping you from adding your own. For example, let's write custom, and let's write text white BG blue 500 like this. So make sure you add a little comma here so you don't have an error, and then custom text white BG blue 500 and save the file. Go back inside of your button, and now when you try in your variants here, there we go. We have an auto-completion for our new variant, custom. And when I save the file, there we go. It has my reusable variant here. So that's why this Shadcn component is so cool, because it truly gives us complete ownership of our components. Let's head back inside of this button, and now let's just remove that custom variant. We are of course later gonna add some of our variants, but this was just for trying it out. And once you remove this and save and go back to page, you can see that now we have an error here because this no longer exists. Great. So you've just learned the basics of setting up your Next.js project, working with Tailwind, and also how we're gonna use shadcn to add all the necessary components we need. Great, great job. So now I want to talk about routing for a bit. For example, how did I know that this page.tsx file right here is the root and entry point of our application? How did I know that this is the file where I had to add this button in order for that to be rendered on our localhost 3000 right here? Well, it's because of two things. First is the fact that this file is inside of the app folder. App folder is a specially reserved folder inside of Next.js, which is going to be used entirely for routing. The second fact is that this file is named page.tsx. Page is a reserved file name inside of Next.js, which tells the router that this is something we want to show to the client, right, in a form of a client route. What's also important is that inside of this page.tsx, we must have a default export. If we don't have a default export, this is not going to be recognized as a valid page component. And one more thing, if you're wondering, the name of the component does not matter. So you can rename this to page, for example, and it's still gonna work. But what does matter is that the name of this file is page.tsx. So here I've written a very quick diagram. Inside of the app folder, if you see page.tsx, or if you're not working with TypeScript, it can be page.js or page.jsx. So it's just the name that's important, not the extension. If you see app/page, that is the equivalent of going to localhost 3000. If it was something else, like app/foo.tsx, in that case, that would not work. That is not going to be a route because foo is not a reserved keyword. Now that we know that, how about we create another client route? All we have to do is create a folder and then put that reserved file name inside of it again. And that's going to translate to localhost 3000/that folder. So let's try that out. Right now, if I go ahead and go to /folder, I have a 404 error. So before we create this properly, I first want to do it incorrectly, so I can show you this example. So I just told you that this is going to be a valid route if we create it like this, but if we try it like this first, this is not going to work. So I want to do that first. Go inside of your app folder, create a new folder, and you can literally name it anything you want. I'm literally going to use folder for now, and go ahead and create a new file, foo.tsx. And we're going to make it a completely proper component. So const is going to be called folder page. Let's return a div folder page. And we're also going to ensure that we do an export default of that folder page. So basically, we're following all the rules for a proper named route, right? But what happens? If I try and refresh on localhost 3000/folder, I'm still getting a 404 page, even though this is a completely correct code. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. Page is a reserved file name. So whenever you want to create a client route, be that in the root of your app folder, or is that going to be a sub route like /folder, it needs to be named page.tsx and it needs to have a default export. So now what I want to do is rename this from foo to page.tsx. And once you save this, refresh your page again, and there we go. I am on localhost 3000/folder, and I'm rendering a folder page. So now we proved this concept, right? If the folder has anything except page.tsx inside, like foo, that is not a route. But if it has page.tsx inside, then that is a valid route. And what you can do is you can also create as many additional subroutes as you want using the exact same concept. For example, inside of this folder, let's create another folder called folder2, and let's create another page.tsx. And let's do one more time, so folder2 page, and let's return a div folder2 page. And now what I can do is in my URL bar, I can go to /folder/folder2. And there we go. Now I am in folder2 page, as you can see right here. So I can either go to /folder or I can go to /folder2. So that's how you create nested routes. Great. Let's go ahead and let's remove this folder altogether. So just make sure you have an empty app folder, and you should be getting a 404 for anything besides localhost 3000. What I want to show you now is how to create an API route. So this is just going to be a very quick preview to show you that you can do that almost exactly the same. But instead of using page, you're going to be using route reserved file name. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of my app folder, I'm going to create another folder, and let's call this folder again. But this time, I'm not going to put page inside. Instead, I'm going to put route.ts inside. And what's important with route.ts files is that you never do a default export inside. Instead, what you do is export function, and then you're exporting the type of route which you need, be that get, post, put, options, patch. Let's do a very simple get request here. And let's do return response.json foo bar, like this. So let's take a look at our structure, app folder, and then folder. So if I go to localhost 3000/folder, you can see that now I no longer have that client preview. Instead, I'm returning JSON here. So I have a little extension in my browser which prettifies this JSON. You might be having something like this, for example, but it's the same thing, right? So this is how we do API routes using a very similar method. But instead of it being page.tsx, it is route.ts. So route is an equivalent reserved keyword for creating API routes as page is for creating client routes. Now that you know about these two reserved keywords, route and page, I want to talk about the third one, which is a layout. So we already have this layout right here, and this is called a route layout. We're not going to play around too much with that one. All that you need to understand about this one is that it is absolutely required for your project. So you can never remove this file. Layout.tsx inside of the app folder must always exist. What it serves is that it renders your actual content, which is children, inside of your HTML structure and your body structure. Later, we're gonna wrap this even more in maybe some providers like toasters, some queries, and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that we cannot create our own layout files. So let me just go ahead and close everything here, and let me delete this folder altogether. And now, I'm just gonna go to /localhost 3000 back here, and let's go ahead and create another folder here, and let's call it out. Now inside of it, let's create another folder, login, and create page.tsx inside. Let's do a very quick login page here with a div login page. And make sure you add an export default. So now if I go to /out/login, there we go. I have my login page, right? So now I'm going to create another one called register. And inside of it, create page.tsx. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. So register page, a div register page. So now I can go to /out/login and /out/register, like this. So what if I want to create a reusable layout, which is going to reflect everything inside of this out folder? For example, I want my out routes to have a specific navbar or a specific sidebar, something like that. Well, we can do that using the reserved layout file. So go inside of your out folder and create a new file, layout.tsx. And the moment you create this file, you're going to get an error. That's because it does not find the default export inside of this layout. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call it out layout. And let's just render an empty div inside. So again, make sure you do export default out layout here. And this is my structure again. So this new layout file is inside of the out folder. And as you can see now, we no longer have an error, but we also don't have absolutely anything rendered. Right now, I'm on localhost 3000/out/register, and this is not visible. If I change it to /login, it's not visible either. So what's missing here is the children. So let's go ahead and extract the children. Let's give them some types. And let's go ahead and render them inside of this div. And now we can see our text again. So I can go to /out/login or /out/register, and both of them are visible. So whenever you're working with layout files, remember it is a reserved file name, meaning that it's always going to behave like this, and you're always going to have children in the props of a layout function. So if you're wondering how did these children come here, well, very simply because that's the way Next.js works. So what did we actually achieve by doing this? It doesn't look like we did much. Well, that's because we're not actually using this layout to do anything. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to give this div a class name of flex, flex-call, and gap y4, like that. And then above the children, I'm going to create a nav element, which is going to say out navbar. And let's give this a class name of padding1, bg, red 500, and w full. And there we go. Now I have an out navbar in my register page. But also, if I go to /out/login, it's also here, right? So what I did right here is created a reusable layout which is reflecting all of my routes inside of the out folder. Both my login and my register page, which don't have the navbar defined inside of them, all have navbars when it actually comes to rendering the route. So that's what layouts do. Layouts are very useful when you want to create a set of reusable layout elements across multiple routes. For example, our Twitch clone is going to have a navbar and a sidebar, and a layout file is exactly what we need to achieve that. So now you know how layouts work, but there's one thing bothering me about this approach, and that is that if I want to create a reusable layout, I first have to create a folder which is going to be visible inside of my URL, right? So what if I didn't want this to be an out prefix, right? What if I just want to go to /login and /register without the out in between? Right now it looks like we cannot do both that and also have a layout file. Well, there actually is a concept called route groups. So what I want you to do is to remove this folder. So go ahead and completely delete this and go back to /localhost 3000. And what I want you to do now is instead create another folder, but this time give it a name inside of parentheses, auth, like this. And then go ahead and create another folder, login, create another folder, register, and let's go ahead inside of login and create page.tsx. Let's do a very quick page here, login page. Let's copy this and let's paste it in the register here. And let's rename this to register page. The name of the component doesn't matter, it just matters that you do a default export. So what we achieved now is that I can actually go to /login and look at this, it's working without the auth in between. So I can directly go to /register or to /login. So by using this parenthesis, you tell the router to not take this as a part of the URL. So this is only an organizational folder. And what's great about these organizational folders is that not only they are well good for organizing stuff when you don't want this login and register to just be randomly laying around in your app folder, but rather be structured together like this, they can also hold layouts. So let's do that again. Let's create layout.tsx. Let's go ahead and render out layout here. Let's render a div. Let's extract our children here. Let's give them a type. And render the children. And there we go. So now our login and register pages are still working and we have a layout. And we can do this exact same thing. Class name flex, flex call, gap y4, a nav saying out nav, class name to the nav to be bgred500 and w full. We can just do this for now. And try it again. So go to /register and go to /login. So both of them are now sharing the same layout, and we are no longer having that little problem where we had auth as a part of our URL. So that's what route groups are useful for. Great. So this is what I wanted you to understand about routing inside of Next.js. If you're still having problems putting this inside of your mental map, I wrote this little diagram which might or might not help you. So when you have a layout inside of a folder, it's going to reflect that to every route inside of that folder. So this is our first example, right? Where we had the actual auth inside of our URL. We now change that to be like this, right? And then we no longer had auth inside of our URL. Instead, all of that just became /login and /register. So basically, layout encapsulates all of the routes inside of that folder. And what's cool about layout is that it does not re-render every time you change the route, right? So that's why layouts are useful, because once they are loaded and rendered, they're not going to be triggered every single time you change one of the matching folders inside. They're going to stay rendered. And now what I want to talk about is types of components and files that exist inside of the app folder. So let's go ahead and remove this as well. Let's go back to localhost 3000 and let's go ahead and create just a test folder with a very simple page.tsx inside. So const test page. Let's return a div hello test page. And let's go ahead and go to /test. And yep, I forgot to do export default test page. There we go, hello test page. And now this seems like a normal React component, right? Well, let's go ahead and try and do something. Let's go ahead and give this an onClick. And let's go ahead and do const onClick here. And let's console log something. And let's pass this onClick to this function here. What happens here? We have an error. It says that we cannot do this. It says if you need interactivity, consider converting part of this to a client component. So what does this mean? What's important for you to understand is that Next.js introduces a new concept of components called server components. And every component that you create inside of the app folder is a server component by default. Server components are useful for a lot of things, but they differ from client components when it comes to interactivity. So server components are rendered on the server. They are extremely good for SEO. They also have the ability to immediately connect to the database. So if we want to do, what we could do here is literally do await our database, then some model that we have like users, find many. We could literally do that inside of this server component. So that's what they are extremely useful for. But they are not good when it comes to interactivity. As you can see here, we have an error. So how do we turn this into a normal component? Very easily by adding use client at the top. Once you do that, let me go ahead and open my browser here and I click on this div. There we go. You can see the console logs in here rendering something and it is increasing every time I click. But if I remove use client, we get that error back again. That's because server components by itself cannot have any interactivity between them. So I just want to clear that up because you're going to see me writing use client a lot. So every time I'm writing use client, it means that I'm converting a server component into a client component. There isn't any need to explain client components because they are the normal components that you are used to, right? They're function components, like normal components inside of standalone React applications. But when working with Next.js, all components are server components by default, and you need to manually tell it, okay, for this one, I want it to be a client component. It's also important to understand that there's nothing wrong with having a lot of client components. So that's completely okay. So now let's go ahead and clear this up. Let's bring this back to normal. And we can, in fact, just remove this test. We no longer need it. So just leave it back at localhost 3000. And here I have one last diagram for you to understand the difference between server components and client components. So server components are backend behavior. They have database access, server cache, they are available for streaming, partial rendering, they are good for SEO, and they are extremely good for initial page load. Whereas client components are your usual components that you're familiar with, and they represent front-end behavior. They have access to useEffect, useState, useCallback, useMemo, all of that stuff that you are used to. Great, so now that you know the basics of routing, of creating named routes, of creating API routes, of creating route groups, you're finally ready to start creating a structure here, which we're gonna reuse to create our authentication. So as I've just said previously, now we're gonna reuse this knowledge which we've just learned about routing in Next.js to create our authentication system. So just ensure that you have the exact same setup as me. We didn't change much. For example, right here I have a button which is inside of my root page.tsx inside of the app folder here, and I have no other folders, nothing. So I'm just gonna quickly prepare this by removing this button and instead a paragraph which is going to say only authenticated users can see this, like that. And I can remove this import from my button, which we have right here. So just a very simple export default function page here. I believe we actually renamed this from home. So for you, it might be home if you didn't rename it, but don't worry. The name of the function doesn't matter. As I've said, the only thing that matters is that the file name is page and that you do a default export. So go ahead and change this to only authenticated users can see this, so you have a better mental map of what we are doing here. So what I want you to do next is go to clerk.com right here. And inside of here, go ahead and find the big dashboard button or login button, depending on whether you are authenticated or not. And you can see that in here, I already have a couple of applications from my previous tutorials. For you, it might be a completely empty screen. Basically, just find the button which says Add Application. And after that, you're gonna get prompted with options like this. Let's go ahead and give our application a name. So in my case, I'm gonna go ahead and call this Game Hub, because we're gonna pretend that that's the name of our app. This is of course a parody. I'm not trying to infringe on anyone's trademark here. And go ahead and choose whatever you want for your login provider. So you have a bunch of options here. As you can see, there are 19 more here which are hidden. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable email addresses, and I'm only going to enable Google. So this way I know that my users have to pass at least Google's authenticity protocol, right? So they cannot spam my email addresses. But Clerk actually has options for you to disable bot emails and to disable spam emails, a bunch of different things. So let's go ahead and select Google or whatever you want for your sign up provider and click Create Application like this. Once you're in here, you're going to see a screen similar to this. So inside of here, you should have Next.js pre-selected, and you should also have your environment keys right here. And in here, we have instructions to paste the keys and the code snippet below into our .environment.local file. We're going to do that, but in a slightly different way. We're not going to do it in a .environment.local, because later on we're going to add Prisma, which can definitely read from .environment.local, but by default it reads from .environment. So I just want to skip that little step where we have to change the target from where Prisma actually reads its variables, and instead we can just put everything inside of the .environment file. But here's the thing we have to do first. So go ahead and find your .gitignore file, as I did right here. And right here, you're probably going to see that we have .environment.local mentioned here. So when you create a .environment.local file, it's not going to be part of your Git history, which is very important because your sensitive information is going to be there and you don't want anyone to see that. So since I just said that we're going to put our keys in a .environment file, that means that we have to modify this .gitignore file and add .environment. You can literally add it anywhere you want. It doesn't matter if you add it below this or at the top. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have explicitly .environment like that. Great. And now what we're going to do is create a new file at the root of our project, so outside of all folders, called .environment, like that. And you can see, since that file is in git ignore, you can see how it is grayed out, meaning that it will not be committed. If yours is not grayed out, if it's in the same color as all the others, right, that could mean that it just didn't, it could mean that you didn't save this file, but it could also mean that it's just VS Code cache. So what you can do, if you're really worried about this, is press Ctrl, Shift, and P, and then just type reload window. And after you reload, you can see how now for a second it was in a bright color and then it turned into grayed out color, meaning that it's officially disconnected from my Git history. Great. So let's go ahead now back inside of this Clerk dashboard and let's copy this environment keys. So you can either select them or you can use the copy icon from here. Now let's go back inside of our code, let's revisit that .environment file, and let's paste everything inside. So you should have the next public Clerk publishable key and Clerk secret key. And no, these are not two lines, so this is one line like this, but I use a option inside of my VS Code to collapse my lines so I don't have to constantly scroll for you, right? So you can see everything clearly on my screen. But this should be like this, one below another, one line for each. And just save this file. Perfect. Once you've done that, go ahead and click Continue in Docs. And in here, you're going to see a beautiful documentation that Clerk has prepared for you. So let's go ahead and see everything we have to do. So first we have to install the Clerk's Next.js SDK, which is going to give us access to some pre-built components, hooks, and helpers, which are going to help us with developing our authentication. So this is the first step, npm install @clerk/next.js. Let's copy this and let's go ahead. And what I actually recommend you do is just shut down your app for this part, because we're going to do a lot of changes. We're going to add some middlewares and some new route groups and stuff like that. So just shut down your app so no background cache will be conflicted, right? And then let's paste this command here, npm install @clerk/next.js. And then we're going to go ahead and do the next step. So I'm going to leave this to download and install, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And in here it says that we have to set environment keys, and we already did that, so we can skip this part. The next thing it tells us to do is to wrap our application inside of Clerk provider. And you can already, well, you can literally read here where it says, right? But just try and think of what we learned in the previous part of the tutorial. Where would you put a wrapper around your entire application? Every single route and every single component must be wrapped in this. Well, the perfect place for that is the layout file. In our case, specifically, it's going to be the root layout inside of the app application. So this is what we have to import. We have to import Clerk provider from @clerk_next.js. So I'm going to copy this line. You don't have to copy it. You can just write it, right? I'm just saving some time here. And let me close this terminal, and let's go inside of the app folder and select layout.tsx. And it should be named a root layout, and it should wrap the HTML and body around our children, which of course represent all of our routes. So let's go ahead and add this import here at the top, like that, Clerk provider. And now what we have to do is wrap our entire structure inside of the Clerk provider, so outside of the HTML tag. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna wrap the Clerk provider. I'm gonna start here, and I'm gonna go ahead and leave it here at the bottom. Perfect. So we are done with step 3, I believe. And now we have step 4, which is require authentication to access your app, which is exactly what we need, because right now this page says, well, I just refreshed and shut down my app so you can't see it, but our root page says that only authenticated users can see that, right? But that's currently not true. So let's make it true by actually adding our middleware file. So what we have to do is copy this code. So make sure you are in the documentation for this part, and go ahead and create a new file in the root of your folder. So some things can happen here. For example, if you have a folder opened and then you click for a new file, it's going to create it inside of that folder. So one simple thing you can do whenever you want to create a file outside of all folders is first click on any file which is outside of all folders and then click on new file. And you can see how now it appears outside of everything. So let's add middleware.ts. And what's important for you to know is that middleware is also a reserved file name. So make sure you don't misspell this name. And then inside, we're going to paste that entire code. And then later, we're going to go ahead and adapt this out middleware. It's a very powerful middleware. You can, of course, look at the documentation for even further information. But for example, you can add public routes, which is an array, and then you can write, for example, /users will be available to everyone, be that they are logged in or logged out. But we're not going to play around with that just yet, so just leave this to be an empty object for now. Great, and let's see what else we have to do. So right now it says that we embedded the user button, but we're going to do that later. We're not going to do that yet. We're going to come back to that. What I actually want to do is create custom sign up and sign in pages. So you can scroll down to find the next steps here and click create custom sign up and sign in pages. Or you don't have to follow the documentation. You can just see what's on my screen and just do that as well. So it says that we have to create a route for signing up, right? So how are we exactly going to do that? Well, this is what I'm going to do. Instead of just creating this inside of the app folder, as it's written right here, I'm gonna reuse that knowledge which we just practiced of creating route groups. So go inside of the app folder and create a new folder in parentheses auth. So you already guessed it, we're gonna have a specific layout for our login and register pages, right? So let's go ahead inside of here and let's create a new folder called sign-up. Like that. And if you look at the documentation, we also need another folder inside with this specific syntax with double square brackets and this 3 dots right here. So that is a catch-all route. So let's go ahead and do this. So make sure you add double square brackets and then sign-up. And then inside, finally create page.tsx. And I'm just going to copy this code from the documentation. It's very simple, so you can find it right here. So import sign up from Clerk Next.js, export default the page, and return the sign up. And now let's go ahead and do the same thing for our sign in page. So inside of our auth folder, create a new folder, sign-in. And let's go ahead and create a catch-all route by using double square brackets, ... sign-in. And inside, create a new file, page.tsx. Let's copy what's written in the documentation and let's paste it right here. So just ensure that this one is actually using sign in, right? So I am inside of my sign in folders here and I'm importing sign in. Inside of my sign up, I'm importing sign up and rendering the sign up. Great, so make sure you have this exact structure. We have our auth folder, which is not going to be visible inside of the URL. The only thing that is going to be visible is the sign in and sign up routes. So make sure you have this exact structure like this and you can close those files. And let's see what else we have to do. So after we've added these pages, what we have to do is add specific environment variables so Clerk knows where to redirect users when they are not logged in, right? Because just by default, we could have named our routes whatever we want. There's no reason for this to be sign in and sign up. This could have been register and log in, right? But we're following the documentation, of course, but you can change this to your liking. But you then also have to tell Clerk, all right, sign in is my sign in route and sign up is my sign up route. So if you use login and register instead, then you would have to change the environment variables to use those. But since we followed the documentation, and I believe you followed it exactly like this, you can just copy this and go inside of your .environment file where you added your Clerk keys, and below the last one, just paste these 4 new options. So sign in URL, sign up URL, and after sign in URL and after sign up URL. So these 2 routes indicate where the user will be redirected once they create an account or log in, and these 2 routes indicate to Clerk where to redirect the user if they try to access an authorized route. Great, and I believe that we can now actually try this out. Yes, I believe that is true. So let's try it out. I'm gonna go ahead here inside of my terminal, and I'm gonna do npm run dev like this on my localhost 3000. And let's look at the code to see what we should be expecting. So when I go to localhost 3000, I should be seeing this, right? A paragraph which says only authenticated users can see this. But let's see if that's actually true. When I go to localhost 3000, I believe that I will be redirected, and I am. Take a look at my URL. I am on localhost 3000 /sign in, and then I even have some redirect URL here to bring back the user to where it's supposed to be. So let's go ahead and click continue with Google and see if we get redirected back to this page where it says only authenticated users can see this. And there we go. After I clicked login with Google, there was a bit of a loading page, and then it showed this page. Only authenticated users can see this. Perfect. So this is exactly what I wanted us to achieve. Right? So now what we have to do is find a way for our user to log out, right? And we can do that quite easily by using that clerk user button component. So make sure that you are seeing this page. Only authenticated users can see this, right? And what I want you to do is go inside of this page and add an import user button from clerk/next.js. And let's remove this with a div here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and give it some style as flex call gap y4, and here I'm gonna add an h1 element dashboard, right? And below that I'm going to render the user button. And here's an important thing. I'm gonna add after sign out URL to be a slash. So make sure you add this route. And now, as you can see, I have the exact icon of what I logged in with, right? So when I click here, there we go. I have some options here. I can manage my account, and I can also log out. So you can go ahead and click sign out here, and you should be redirected back to your login page. Let's see if that is true. So once I go here, there we go. So I'm back on the login page. Let's try one more time to see if all of this is working. There we go. So it's working. Perfect. So we can now log in, we can log out, and let me just go ahead and quickly debug if this should be happening here. Well, actually, we don't have to debug this, right? Because later on, we're gonna enable this slash route to be publicly available for everyone. So we can actually leave it exactly like this. But what I want to do next is actually style this login screen a bit better. Because right now it's kind of looks weird. It's here in the corner, right? So what can I do to make it be centered? Well, we can use that layout function. So let's go inside of the auth folder and create a new file, layout.tsx. And let's go ahead and do clerk layout, actually auth layout. Let's go ahead and extract our children from here. Let's give our children a type of React node. And let's render the children. And now we should not be seeing any changes, but we should have a proper layout here. And if you remember how we did that auth thing, very similarly, we can now center our application. But just before we do that, I want to go inside of my app folder, globals.css. So go inside of here, and just below this Tailwind directives, add HTML, body, and colon root, like this. And go ahead and add height 100% and add a little semicolon at the end. So this is the code snippet we just added. Make sure you save this file. Now go back to auth layout here and give this div a class name of hfull, flex, items center, and justify center. And there we go. After I've added these three classes here, you can see that my entire code is centered here. And if I click on sign up, it redirects to /sign up, and that is centered as well. So we just use that knowledge of layouts to actually do something useful for us. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go ahead and start to style our app a little bit. Specifically, we're gonna change this background to be a little bit darker, and we're also gonna add our application logo right here with a little quote to create an account. Great job. So it took us barely 20 minutes to integrate authentication. Great job. What I want to do next is actually style this screen a little bit. So in order to do that, I want you to visit my GitHub so you can copy some styles. And the reason I want you to copy these styles, and we're not going to write them here, is because there isn't any logic by which I can teach you how to write those. They are just color changes, right? So I literally transferred those colors from hex codes to HSL values, right? So you're gonna see what I'm talking about in a second, but I just want to explain why we're copying this and not writing it ourselves. So you can find the GitHub link in the description of the YouTube video, or if you're watching this on my platform, you have a little icon below the video with a GitHub logo. So go ahead and click on that. And I want you to go ahead inside of my GitHub here. So you're going to see a repository which looks similar to this, right? And I want you to go inside of the app folder. Let me just zoom in even more so you can see this better. So let me view my code. Find the app folder and go ahead and find globals.css. So it should be right here. As you can see, I have some additional folders here from the finished project. You're probably not going to have that. So just find globals.css. And inside of here, you can see that it is the exact same thing we just modified recently, but now I want you to copy this entire code inside. So all of these colors have been changed, and as I've said, there isn't any way I can really teach you how to do this, right? I just manually changed colors until it looked the way I want it to look. Besides that, we're also going to change the background color, and we'll add this little class hidden scroll bar so we can use it in a couple of places. So make sure you copy this from globals.css from my GitHub. And now what I want you to do is go inside of the app folder here, inside of globals.css, remove everything and paste all of that. So there we go. Now I have this apply, I have this hidden scroll bar, and all of my colors have been changed. So as I've said, there really isn't anything I can explain here more than that. And I think that already, if you look at your app, it should look a little bit different, just like this. Great. And while we are here, head back inside of my GitHub. And now I want you to go inside of my public folder. So again, we are here in the root of my project. Go ahead and find the public folder. And in here, I have some images. So go ahead and find spooky.svg. So this is going to be the logo of our application. This is from Logo Dust. And you can go ahead and find even more open source logos from their website. Just keep in mind that this is only useful for demos or some side projects, right? You cannot trademark this logo or anything like that. This is open source logo. So you can go ahead and right click and just save this image like that. And now you're going to drag and drop that inside of your public folder right here. So go ahead and open this public folder, and you should just have next.svg and vercel.svg inside. So go ahead and drag and drop this file, which you can download from my GitHub, and make sure you have spooky.svg inside of your public folder like that. And great, you can now close my GitHub and we can just focus on this login screen. Now what I want to do is I want to go back inside of my auth folder, right? So app auth right here, and I'm going to create a little component here. And this is the way I'm going to create my components folder. So there is another type of folder which I didn't cover in the beginning, which is a folder which begins with an underscore. So create a new folder, underscore components. So what does this underscore do? So similarly to this parenthesis, which means don't show this in the URL, underscore means don't even put it in the router, right? So no matter what the name of this file is inside, even if I put page.tsx inside of this folder, it will not be rendered in the router. So that's what the underscore does. And I think it's perfect for components, especially if we have a component which for any reason is named page, right? Because we know that that is a reserved keyword. But if we put it in a folder with an underscore in the beginning, that tells the Next.js, don't even think about putting this in the routing system. So that's why I'm going to put my components in here. And for the auth folder, we're only going to have one component called logo. So create a new file inside logo.tsx. like that. And let's go ahead and import image from next image. And let's go ahead and let's import Poppins from next font Google. And let's also import our cn from /libutils. If you're wondering where this comes from, that came when we installed shatcn. So we have this lib folder and utils, and we're going to use this to merge our Tailwind classes or to merge our, these class names which come from some weird constants like fonts, right? So now let's define this. So const font is Poppins. Let's give it a subsets, which is an array of Latin, and let's give it weight like this. And let's give it 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. Actually, we can, 700 and 800. So all the options basically. And now let's do export const logo right here. And for now, we're just going to return a div which says logo like this. So make sure you do an export const. So we're not going to do default exports when it comes to components. We're going to do named exports. But when it comes to pages and layouts, that's when it is very important to do default exports. But for our components, that's not going to be the case. So now I want to import this component so we can continue developing it and so you can see what's happening inside of the screen. So go back inside of your layout, inside of the auth folder here, and just above children, add that logo component from /components/logo, and you import it using this curly brackets because it is a named export. So it's looking at this exact constant. So the naming matters when it comes to named exports, right? So make sure that this logo matches this component's logo right here, and save this file. And now, as you can see here, well, you can barely see, but I have a text logo here right next to my login box, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this flex. Actually, besides this flex, I'm going to give it specific instructions to use column layout. So I'm going to give it flex-call. And now my logo text has changed to the top of that box right here, exactly where I want to render my actual logo. So now let's go inside of logo.tsx here and let's style this. So give this a class name of flex call, items center, and gap y4. Then inside, open up another div with a class name of background white, rounded full, and padding 1. So we're going to create a little circle here, right? And then inside, we're going to render our image component, which we imported right here at the top. And we're going to pass into the source to be /spooky.svg. And don't worry about this error, right? So this spooky.svg comes from our public folder, spooky.svg. So make sure you add this from my GitHub as I've instructed before. And now we're going to give this out of GameHub because it's the name of our parody app. Let's give it a height of 80 and let's give it a width of 80 as well. And there we go. Now we have a nice little logo here. Now let's go outside of this div, which is representing a circle and image inside, and let's add a new div with a class name flex call, and items center. And inside of here, we're going to render a paragraph, which is going to say GameHub, which is the name of our app, right? And let's go ahead and give it a class name, but we're going to use dynamic classes. So open curly brackets and let's use this cn function, which we imported from here. So now we can add this font class name in combination with other Tailwind classes. So in the first line, I'm going to write text extra large and font semi-bold. And below that, I'm going to go ahead and write font.classname like that. And you can see how now I have my GameHub. It's in dark color, so it's hard to see. We're going to change that in a second by changing the overall dark theme of our app. So let's just leave it like this for now. And below this paragraph, add another paragraph, which is going to say, let's play. And let's go ahead and give this one a class name as well to be CN, and let's give it text small and text muted foreground. And then let's pass in font and class name. Like that, and don't forget a comma after the first one. There we go. So now it says Game Hub and let's play. So how can we improve this code a little bit? It looks like I'm reusing this font class name. How about I add that to the div itself? I think that could be better. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this first paragraph, which just says Game Hub, and I'm going to change it to just use good old class name with strings. Like this. So I'm just changing it to class name like that. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the paragraph below. So I'm basically removing that font class name because I just noticed that we can do this in a better way. And I think I don't even have to collapse this paragraph. Like it all fits. And instead, I'm going to give the font class name to this wrapping div here. So let's go ahead and wrap this string of this div inside of curly brackets. Let's add our CN function and let's wrap the entire thing inside. And then I'm going to collapse this and add a second argument here to be font class name. There we go. So now only once I'm doing this and the rest has its own classes. Perfect. And what I want to do now is add a little apostrophe here for let's play, so it's grammatically correct. But what happens if I do that? If I save, it's actually working. You can see in my page that there is a little apostrophe here. But here I have an error that this needs to be escaped. So I can actually use this little snippet here to do that. So instead of writing an apostrophe, I'm going to write an and sign, write apos, and then a colon. So I'm gonna do this and save, and you can see that in my screen it stays exactly the same. So it's working and we have no errors inside of our code. Great. What I want to do now is go back inside of my layout here and just give these two items a little bit of space because this text is too close to my box here. So at the end of this class names here, so I am in my out layout, right? In the out folder layout here. After justify center, go ahead and add space Y6. So they are separated. Great. So this now looks even better. What we have to do now is change our app theme to use dark mode. So then this text is going to become white and this is gonna become even lighter. And we also have to change the clerk components to use dark mode as well. So first, let's change the clerk components. For that, we have to install a package clerk themes. So go inside of your terminal, and I'm gonna shut down the app and write npm install @clerk/themes, like that. So let's go ahead and install that. Let's run our app again. Refresh your localhost every time you shut down your app. And let's go back inside of the app folder layout.tsx. So this root layout where we actually have the clerk provider. And now just below this import of clerk provider, go ahead and import dark from clerk themes. And now give this clerk provider a property appearance, which is an object, base theme dark, which we just imported. And there we go. Once you save, clerk is now in dark mode. What we have to do next is create our actual application to be using dark mode. So for that, I want you to go to ShadCN UI because this is the library we are using. And I want you to go inside of the documentation here and go ahead and select the dark mode right here and select Next.js. So let's install Next themes first. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Let me just zoom in so you can see. So first thing we're doing is installing Next themes here. I'm going to go inside of my terminal. I will shut it down and run npm install Next themes, and you can run your app again. And now we have to create our theme provider. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of our components here, create a new file, theme-provider.tsx, like that. And I want you to copy and paste this code from components theme provider, or you can of course visit my GitHub and find this exact file and copy and paste it if for any reason it is not available in the documentation page. So make sure that inside of your components folder, you have theme-provider.tsx and you have this exact code inside. And let me zoom out so you can see how it looks in without line collapsing. Great. And now we have to wrap our application inside of this theme provider. So I'm going to go ahead inside of the app folder again, inside of layout.tsx here. And let's go ahead and let's import theme provider from add/components theme provider. So from that file which we just created, theme provider right here, you can see that this is not a default export. This is the equivalent of doing that const theme provider and then an arrow function. You can of course also write function directly. And now you can import theme provider like that. And now go inside of your body element and collapse this children and wrap the theme provider around. So theme provider and theme provider like that. And let's indent this children. And now I want to give it some props. I want to give it an attribute of class. I want to give it a forced theme dark. And I also want to give it a storage key to be GameHub-theme. So these three elements are important. And let's revisit our application now. And if I refresh here, so make sure you refresh because we shut down our app, remember? And there we go. Now this looks much better. You can see that our texts are now clearly visible because the app is using dark theme, meaning that it changed the primary color of our text from black to white. Perfect. So the logo is visible. We have our game hub here and it's clearly visible that this says let's play, and even our clerk is using dark mode as well. Perfect. One more thing I want to do before we wrap this up is enable usernames to be required whenever user is signing up. So clerk can do that, and we're going to do that right now. So let's go ahead and visit clerk.com again. You can either go to clerk.com or use the link in the description. So go ahead and find the app which you just created here. And you can get you're probably going to get this little confetti because we have our first user, right? And first thing I want to do is delete that user. So you can do that by going inside of users here, find the user and go ahead and delete it like this and confirm that you want to delete that user. The reason I want to delete it is because we're going to create our username field to be required, and I want to make sure that there is no stale or old data for where that is not true, right? So now let's go inside of user and authentication here, and let's select the first tab, email, phone, and username. And in here, I want to go ahead and enable the username. So users can set usernames to their account. And you can see that it also added two little labels here, required and used for sign in. But for my case and for our case, I actually don't want users to be able to log in using their username. I only want them to log in using their email. So this is your choice, right? But you can click on this little settings icon here and you can go ahead and disable sign in. So we are not going to allow users to sign in with the username, and click continue. So just make sure that this says required. Username should be required and everything else can stay the same. Click apply changes. You're probably going to get a warning like this, and you can just ignore that and click apply changes again. And now let's go ahead and refresh our localhost again, and let's try and create a new account now. And you can see now, after I created my account, I am still inside of our custom sign-in page with our logo and our slogan here, and we have a form to fill in the missing fields, and it says that I need to add a username. And what's cool about this, that Clerk is actually going to warn users if they're trying to use a username which already exists, right? But since this is my first user, there's no chance of that happening, but I do believe you can enter a too short username. There we go. You can see the username must be between 4 and 64 characters. So I'm going to change this to code with Antonio. That's going to be my username, and I'm going to click continue. And there we go. I am back inside of my dashboard. And now when I click here, you can see my username right here. And users can also change their usernames by clicking on manage account and then clicking change username right here. So you can try that out. Perfect. So we are finally ready to actually synchronize this authentication system with our database, right? Because we're going to have some list of users inside of our application. And it's also important that our app registers when someone uses this clerk toolkit to change their profile picture, because they can do that as well if you just saw it in the settings. So we need to create a webhook which is going to handle when user is created. So we add them to our own database. We have to handle a case when user is deleted, so we remove them from the database. And we also have to handle cases when user has updated their information from the clerk settings page. So all of those cases are what we have to handle to be completely synchronized with what's going on in the clerk dashboard. And then we can finally work with our users in an advanced way by showing them on the home page, searching for them, and creating all the necessary relationships with other models which are going to exist in our database. Perfect. So we implemented dark mode, we stylized and personalized our login screens, we enabled the username, and now we are ready for some more complex stuff. Great job. What I want to do next is establish a connection between our application and our database. And for that, I'm going to be using MySQL on PlanetScale. That being said, you don't have to use PlanetScale, and you don't even have to use MySQL for this project. I do recommend that you choose a relational database rather than a non-relational database, but if for any reason you want to, you can use MongoDB, you can use PostgreSQL from Supabase or NeonDB. But I'm going to show you how to create a MySQL database from PlanetScale. PlanetScale offers one free forever database, but it does require you to add a credit card in order to access that. So if you don't have a credit card, you have a couple of options. The best and the simplest option for you is to learn how to spin up MySQL locally. The reason why I'm not showing that in this tutorial is because there are different machines that people are watching this tutorial on. I specifically have a MacBook, so I have one set of instructions on how to do that. If you have a Windows machine, you're gonna have to Google how to set up MySQL locally on Windows. If you have Linux, you're gonna Google it for Linux, right? One alternative that I've heard of PlanetScale is CockroachDB, which I'm not sure if it's exactly MySQL. I'm not that familiar with it. It could be some other relational database like SQLite or something like that. But nevertheless, I'm going to show you how to do it on PlanetScale. If you have a credit card, then you can follow these exact instructions and it's going to be completely free forever. If you don't have a credit card, go ahead and Google how to set up MySQL locally. All that matters is that you have a database URL which you can connect to. So let's go ahead to planetscale.com and go ahead and log in. And then in here, you're going to see a dashboard similar to this. So I already have a database here, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. So click Create New Database here and make sure you select the Hobby option, which is free forever. And go ahead and confirm that this says monthly cost free. And let's give our database a name. In my case, it's going to be Game Hub. This region can stay the same, and go ahead and click Create a Database. So in here, I'm going to select Prisma, so I get the instructions for Prisma. And I'm going to go ahead and create my password. So click Create Password. And you can go ahead and copy this and save it on your machine. And what we're going to do next is we're going to install a couple of packages. So let's go ahead and do the following. I'm going to go ahead and open my terminal here. I'm going to shut down my app. And first I'm going to write npm install -d Prisma like this. And then what I'm going to do is run npm install add prisma/client. So both of these packages are important for you to have inside of your project. So we did npm install dprisma and npm install prisma client. Great. And now that we've done that, we have to run npx prisma init. So let's go ahead and copy this command and do npx prisma init. And there we go. Let's take a look at everything that was created here now. So as you can see, we now have a Prisma folder with schema.prisma inside, and I have a couple of settings here. And I also, in my .environment file where we added our clerk keys, we now have this big comment here, and we have a dummy database URL. So first thing I want to explain is inside of this schema Prisma, if you don't have a nice syntax like I do, go ahead and install an extension called Prisma. And that's gonna prettify this look right here. Now let's go ahead and select the optimized. If you're on PlanetScale, go ahead and select optimized here. And then you just have to go ahead and find your database URL. So if you're not using PlanetScale, just find a URL similar to this, right? And you have to add that to your environment file. So go inside of .environment and replace this database URL with your proper database URL, and it needs to be stored inside of this key right here, database URL, because that's what we are reading here in our Prisma schema, environment file database URL. Great. And now let's go ahead. If you're using MySQL, you have to modify your schema Prisma a bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and you can pause the screen and see what I've changed. So we have data source DB here, and we changed the provider to use MySQL. The URL stayed the same, so it's database URL, but we also added a relation mode Prisma. I believe you only need this if you're using MySQL. I don't think you will need this if you're using something else, but you can still add it here. And we also have the generator client here, which I believe stayed the same. So save this file, ensure that you have the database URL here. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go ahead and run npx prisma db push. So let's go ahead here inside of our terminal, and let's run npx prisma db push. And I believe we're actually gonna get an error here because we don't have any models, but that's completely okay. All that matters is that we have this. The database is already in sync with the Prisma schema. Great, and I think that is it, what we have to do. Yes, that seems to be it. You can now close this and you can go back inside of your application. So one more thing that we have to do here is we have to create our database util. So let's go ahead inside of the lib folder and create a new file db.ts. Let's go ahead and let's import the Prisma client from @prisma/client, which we installed a couple of minutes ago. And let's do export const database to be global this.prisma or new Prisma client. And then let's write if process.environment node environment is not production, global this.prisma is assigned to the db constant. And now let's fix this error. So let's add declare global var prisma to be prisma client or undefined, like this. So why are we doing this? That is because when using Next.js, every time you save a file, something called hot reload happens, which is what you see every time you modify a file and save it, you instantly see the changes inside of your screen. So that's called hot reload. And what that does with this little lib which we created here is creates a bunch of new Prisma clients. So what we do is if we are not in production, we store that inside of global this. And global this is not affected by hot reload. So that way we prevent the hot reload from creating a bunch of unnecessary Prisma clients here. And in production, we don't do that because in production, we don't use hot reload. Great. So now what I want to do is go inside of our Prisma schema here and create our user model. So let's go ahead and write model user. Let's give it an ID of type of ID. That's going to be our primary key here. and let's give it a default value of UUID. Then let's also go ahead and give it a username, which is going to be a required string, which is unique. And let's also give it an image URL, which is also going to be a string, and db.text, so we can store more characters inside than your usual string. And let's also add external user ID, which is going to be a string, and it's going to be unique. And let's also add bio, which is going to be an optional string, and also db text, so we can store more characters inside. And lastly, let's add created at, which is date time, and the default value is now. And let's add updated at, which is also date time, with the value at updated at, like this. So we have an ID which will be created every time this user model is created. We have a username field and the image URL field, which will be populated from our Clerk webhook. So when user signs up using Clerk, we're going to fire a webhook which is going to connect to our database and apply the username and the image URL from there. And the same is true for external user ID. So inside of external user ID, we're going to store the ID which Clerk uses for that user. And bio is going to be something of our own. So Clerk is not going to know about the bio. That's going to be our thing. Perfect. So now that we have this, we are ready to push this to the database. So go inside of your terminal here and run npx prisma db push like this. And that's going to connect to your database, and it's going to synchronize this new user model. As you can see, your database is now in sync with your Prisma schema. And one more thing we have to run is npx prisma generate. So this is going to add that to our local environment so that we can actually access this user model. And one more command I want to show you is npx prisma studio, like this. And that's going to open on localhost 5555. So let me go ahead here and paste that here. And you should see something like this. So you can see that it recognizes that we have a user model. It is of course empty, there are no rows in this table, but you can see the fields: ID, username, image URL, external user ID, and more. Great, so you've successfully connected to the database. You can now shut this down. What we're gonna do next is build our webhook. So what we have to do next is expose our local host to the internet, right? So let's go ahead and look at that. So in my terminal here, I'm gonna go ahead and run npm run dev, and I'm gonna go on localhost 3000. So this is working, right? But what we have to do is we have to find a way to expose this local host to other services, because we're going to be needing webhooks, right? So we need them to be allowed to connect to our local host. In production, that's not going to be a problem because we're going to be deployed on Vercel URL, so we're just going to use that URL. But for development mode, we need to find a way to expose our local host to everyone on the internet who has the URL. Right? So right now our website is only accessible on localhost 3000, and that's not something that we can connect our webhooks to. So what I recommend you do is download and install ngrok. So go ahead to ngrok.com/download. I'm going to put the link in the description as well. And go ahead here and select whatever your machine is, or whatever way you want to do this. So I'm on Mac OS here, so I run this brew command here, or you can also do it using the zip file. And after you've done this, so be that for Windows or for Linux, this is very important for you to do, because Clerk is not going to be the only webhook we're going to need. We're also going to have some other services. So it's crucial that you have to have this installed in your machine. But for production, we're not going to use this at all. This is only for development mode. So to confirm that you have ngrok set up correctly after you've done this install steps, you can just write ngrok in your terminal, and you should be getting Well, all the options that you can do with ngrok. You should not be getting a command not found. If you get command not found, it means that you haven't installed this properly. So make sure that you have this installed. And after you confirm that your command is working, what you have to do is add your auth token. And for that, you need to create an account. So go ahead and click on sign up here and create an account. So once you're inside, you're gonna see a screen similar to this. And here again, you have some instructions on how to install ngrok. And what you have to do next is run this ngrok config add auth token. So basically copy whatever it says right here. I'm gonna hide my token here so you cannot connect to mine, and don't share yours with anyone as well. And now go ahead and add that in your terminal. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste that here and add it, and there we go. Auth token has been saved to my configuration file. And then what I can do is ngrok HTTP 3000 like this. And as you can see now, I have this forwarding right here, and make sure you use this HTTPS. So go ahead and copy this URL here, and we're gonna go ahead and paste that inside of my localhost here. And what I'm gonna do is get this error, right? Because we have nothing else running on localhost 3000. So go back inside of your terminal, make sure ngrok is running, and open a new terminal and do npm run dev. So now this is gonna be running on localhost 3000, right? If I go ahead and visit localhost 3000, my application is running right here. But if I go back here, let me expand my screen so I can see my URL here. So you can even shut this down and just run ngrok again, and you should be seeing this URL. But keep in mind, every time you run ngrok, it's going to be a different URL. So just copy this forwarding URL here and make sure you have npm run dev running. And look at this. Now we can access our application, but in a different URL. And you can even share this with your friends if that's what you want. Perfect. But one more thing that I want to show you is this exact issue, right? So every time we shut down the ngrok server, so always make sure that your npm run dev is running. And when you want to expose that using ngrok, every time you do this, it's a completely different URL, right? So if I try and refresh on this page now, I have an error that this one doesn't exist. And that can get pretty annoying, and you can probably forget to, rerun your ngrok, especially if you're watching this tutorial over a couple of days. I doubt that you're gonna keep this running all the time, right? You're gonna be shutting down your app. So every time you change this, you're actually gonna have to change this URL in all the webhooks that we use. So that can get pretty annoying. So this is what you can do to get your stable URL inside of ngrok here. I'm actually not sure exactly where it is. It could be in Cloud Edge endpoints right here. Is maybe not here. In Cloud Edge domain right here. In here, go ahead and click on new domain. You can see that I already have one, so I get an error. So this is in their free tier. Also, you don't have to upgrade ngrok at all. So this is just for development mode. No need to purchase anything here. So just use the free tier. Basically, just get your free domain. As of time that I'm recording this video, they offer one stable static domain free forever, right? So what you can do is copy this right here. You can see that when I click, you can click on this little icon here, start a tunnel. So click on this, and then you have the command which you can run. So go ahead and copy that as well. And then let's go back inside of here, and instead of running ngrok HTTP 3000, we can paste that command like this, and there we go. Now we have our own URL, which is always going to be the same. So when I paste that here, do I have my app running? Oh, I think I also have to specify the port for this. Yes, so paste this, and you can see that at the end, the port is 80. So change that to 3000. All right, and let's try that again. So you can see the URL is now the same. I don't have to copy it anymore. I can just refresh this page, and there we go. Now I have a stable URL here which matches what I've gotten in here in these domains. If this has been disabled for you for any reason, well, unfortunately, you're just gonna have to work with different URLs every time. But whatever you do, no need to upgrade ngrok. So you can completely use the free version that they have. Perfect. So that's what I wanted us to do. So now you can go ahead and shut this down, take a break. And when you come back, just go ahead and run this command again. And if you forget it, you can always go inside of Cloud Edge, Domains, find the domain, click on this little icon and just copy it from here. And that way your domain is always gonna stay the same. Perfect. So yeah, now you know how to expose your localhost 3000 to the World Wide Web, which means that we can connect this to our webhooks. So let's go ahead one more time and just establish our knowledge of local tunnels. So I'm gonna shut down all of my terminals. So I will shut down this and I will shut down this. I only have one terminal running and I cannot connect to my local host. So whenever you're starting your project in the future, go ahead and do npm run dev. That's the first step you have to do. And then in another terminal, go ahead and use that ngrok command. You can see I have it right here. If you don't have it, you can find it. You can just go back in the tutorial where I showed you exactly where it's written in ngrok.com website, and make sure that when you copy that, you change the port to be 3000 and not 80. So now my website is available both on localhost 3000 here, but it's also available on this URL right here. So if I go back here and change this to my URL, I'm seeing exactly what I just saw on my local host. Perfect. So what we're ready to do now is create our Clerk webhook. So for that, I'm going to use their documentation here. So what they say to do first is enable webhooks. So go to your Clerk dashboard here and find the webhooks in the sidebar. And inside of here, go ahead and click Add Endpoint. And in here, you're gonna paste not your local host, but that ngrok URL which we just established, which you can get from your terminal right here. So this HTTPS option right here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna change this endpoint to go to /API/webhooks/clerk. So this is very important. This is our structure. Make sure it goes to /API/webhooks, so multiple, because we're going to have more of them, and specifically the Clerk one. Great. And then in the message filtering, go ahead and select user and go ahead and select everything. So user created, deleted, and updated, and click create. Perfect. So confirm one more time that this URL is correct. You can also copy it from here and paste it in your tab one more time, and your local host should be showing up here. Great. So what we have to do now is actually build the webhook. So we just enabled everything we need here. What we need to do now is get the signing secret. So inside of this dashboard here where you added this endpoint, you should see the signing secret. So go ahead and click on the little eye icon here, and that's gonna allow you to see this secret. And the docs then say to store that inside of webhook secret inside our environment file, but we're not gonna store it as that. We're gonna store it as something else. So let me zoom back in here and go inside of my .environment file. And in here, let's go just below this next public clerk sign up URL. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and add clerk_webhook_secret. So the reason I'm adding a prefix clerk is because we're going to have multiple webhooks here. So make sure you paste your super secret signing URL here, which you can get from your dashboard right here. So sign in secret, we clicked on the little eye icon and we got the sign in secret. All right, so now that we have that, you can go ahead and read even further about understanding the webhook payload, so you know how that's going to look. But what we have to do next is install Swix. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is also only needed for development, right? So don't worry about this. So go ahead and install Swix like this. And I just think I just shut down my ngrok. So make sure you install Swix. And if you accidentally shut down your ngrok like I did, just go ahead and rerun that command right, on your stable domain with port 3000, and ensure that in another terminal you have npm run dev running. So it's important that both of these are running at the same time. Great, so I'm gonna open a third terminal. What we had to do was do npm install Swix, so just make sure that you do that. Great, and now we have instructions on how to create the webhook, but we're not going to create it in this exact repository. We're going to create it in a different one. So let's go ahead and close everything here, go inside of our app folder, and in here create a new folder called API, and then inside of that another folder, webhooks, and then inside of that another folder, clerk. And then create a file, a route.ts. So app folder, API, webhooks, clerk. So exactly what we've given it right here, right? So let me go ahead and expand this. So our ngrok URL /API, webhooks, clerk. So it needs to be the same. Great. So let me just collapse this, go back here. And let's take a look at what we have to add here. So first, let's add our imports. So you can go ahead and open this documentation as well. I'm going to paste the link in the description, or you can just follow along as I do. So first, we're going to add the webhook from Swix. We're going to import headers from Next Headers, and we're going to import, this is a type, webhook event from Clerk Next.js server. After that, we're going to go ahead and actually enable this route to be a post function. So let's go ahead and give it an end curly bracket here. And then let's go ahead and do the following. Let's see if we have the webhook secret. So I'm going to copy this from here and paste it inside. And let me just zoom out a bit so you can see. So this is what it's supposed to look like, but we have to modify it a little bit. So here we look for process.environment.webhook secret. But if you take a look at our .environment, we have clerk webhook secret. So copy this from .environment file and then replace this. So no need to replace this constant. Just replace where the constant gets its information from, which is process.environment.clerk webhook secret. And it would also be a good idea to fix this error, which currently tells you that if there is no webhook secret, please add that to your environment. So let's be correct and tell it that they need to add clerk webhook secret to our environment file. Perfect. So make sure you've added that. What we have to do next is get the headers. So let's go ahead and copy this. Let's go just below this if clause here. And let's get our headers. So I'm just gonna indent this like that. So we get the headers from Next.js, and then from that headers object, we get the Swix ID, the Swix timestamp, and the Swix signature. So we're gonna use these three options in combination with our clerk webhook secret to verify that what is trying to access this endpoint has permissions to our database. Otherwise, any user would be able to trigger our webhook, and that's not good, right? So we need to enable this to happen. And now let's go ahead and add this if clause that if there are no headers, break the function immediately. So we're not going to allow anyone to do this if they don't provide the headers, which are Swix ID, timestamp, and Swix signature, for which we check right here. So if any of them are missing, we pass in the error and prevent them from accessing our webhook. Great. And now let's go ahead and let's get the body and the payload. So after this if clause, which checks for Swix headers, let's go ahead and get the body. So we get the payload using await request.json. So make sure that this is an asynchronous function if you didn't copy it, but instead you wrote it yourself. And then we stringify that. So we turn that object inside of a string. And then what we're going to do, let me just add it like this, is we're going to initialize our webhook with our webhook secret constant, and then we're going to attempt to verify it. So let's do this step by step. First, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new Swix instance here. So after we get our body, let's go ahead and let's add this. So create a new Swix instance. So we create this VH constant using the new webhook, which we imported from Swix, and we pass in the webhook secret, which we get right here using our environment field, clerk webhook secret, which if you check is filled right here. Great. And now that we have that, let's go ahead and try and verify that. So copy this try and catch block right here, And just below this event, paste that here. So we open a try and catch block where we use this webhook with our webhook secret, and we attempt to verify who this user is who is trying to access our webhook using the Swix ID from the headers, which we have right here, Swix timestamp, and Swix signature. So all of those things need to match in order for whatever is trying to access our webhook to actually have access. So this is going to be a very secure webhook. And the reason we need to secure it like this is because we're going to allow this to be a public URL. So anyone will be able to ping this route, but only those with proper headers which matches in combination with our webhook secret will be able to actually continue and not get this error that there was a problem verifying the webhook. Great, so save this try and catch event, and let's see what else we have to do here. So after that, we're practically done. We can now access the data, the event type, and just copy these two constants, these two console logs, and this response return right here. So outside of this try catch function, and the function like this. So we have these two new constants with the ID and the event type. And what's important in webhooks is that you return a response. In our case, our default response is going to be 200. So if you don't return a response, I think that then the webhook is going to stay in timeout or pending, something like that. So make sure you always add a response at the end. Perfect. So let's go ahead and review this one more time. Inside of your dot environment, you need to have a clerk webhook secret. So make sure you copied this in full. So confirm one more time in your clerk dashboard here. I'm going to expand my screen. Make sure you have this sign-in secret and make sure that you copied it from start to end. Then make sure that you have pasted that here and make sure that clerk webhook secret matches exactly what you check in this constant clerk webhook secret like this. Perfect. And you can already try this, I believe. So let me go ahead and copy this and try that in my browser. So if I go here, there we go. I have a response null here. And I think that's because we got intercepted somewhere. So let's go ahead and try that. Is this correct? API webhooks clerk. I think we can try and initiate an event here. So let's go into testing. So go inside of your clerk dashboard into testing here, and let's create user.created like this. And let's go ahead and prepare our terminal here. And go ahead and open the ngrok terminal. So I'm going to zoom out so we can see everything that's going on. Yes, I'm not sure if that's going to appear here or in the ngrok one. So make sure you have both of this ready. So let's go here, select user.created. It doesn't matter. So just fire any event for now. But we do listen only for user updates. So make sure you select one of the user ones and go ahead and click send example. And let's see if this is working or not. Oh, it looks like it's preventing us from connecting to this webhook because we forgot to add it to public routes, right? So let's go ahead and do the following before we try this again. So go inside of your middleware.ts right here. And inside of this object, add a public routes with an array, and then inside of that, you're gonna go ahead and write /API/webhooks, and we're gonna go ahead and enable this route for all webhooks inside. So this is gonna match both /clerk and whatever we're gonna have in the future. So let's try this again. I think that now if I try this here, it looks like this page isn't working. Yes, because I get a 405, so that's correct. Yes, so the error is 405, meaning that we are now throwing that error. So if we take a look back inside of our app API route, I think that do we throw a 405? Well, basically it's working. I don't know what else to say. All right, and let's try this again. So now let's fire that event from the clerk dashboard. So send example. And there we go. Look at this. We now have, so where is it? It's not in ngrok. It's where your localhost npm run dev is running. This is where it appears. So you should be having this huge log right here, right? And you can see that the event is user.created. So let's simplify this and let's only log the ID with the event type. So I'm gonna go back inside of my terminal here, and I'm going to, can I add just a bunch of spaces here like that? And I'm gonna zoom out here, and I'm gonna send example again, and there we go. Webhook with ID of some user ID and the type of user created. So just confirm that you're getting this console log right here. So let's recap everything we had to do to get to this. So what's important is that you've enabled your API webhooks to be a public route, so anyone can access that, whether they are logged in or not. And then what's important is that when you try and go manually on that route, so look at my URL, it's that ngrok URL /API webhooks clerk. When I try like this, I get a 405 because I'm not authorized, because I don't have the headers, right? And then make sure that in here you also have the correct URL using that ngrok URL /API webhooks clerk. Go into testing here, select a random user event. So let's try with deleted now. Go ahead and prepare your terminal here and go inside of the terminal where you are running npm run dev. So not inside of the ngrok one, but the other one. And let me add a couple of spaces here so we can see it. I'm going to send this example here, and there we go. Now there is a type of user.deleted. Perfect. So this is now working. And now let's try and shut everything down. So I'm shutting down localhost and I'm shutting down ngrok. So I'm deleting all of my terminals here, right? So now my application is not gonna be running, I believe. There we go. And if I try and send an example now, I should get an error here. And let's go ahead and refresh. There we go. You can see how it says that there is an error right here. This one failed because my app is not running. So I want to teach you how to rerun your app, because I guess you're going to be doing this over a couple of days and you're probably not going to have this running all the time. So step 1, npm run dev. Step 2, open a new terminal and run that ngrok command with the port 3000 and with your stable URL, if you have that feature. And then once you get that, you're gonna have this URL right here. So if you're using ngrok with different domains every time, then you're gonna have to copy the domain from here every time, go inside of your webhook, click on edit, and you're gonna have to paste it here. Just remember to add this webhook API webhooks clerk. So whenever you do this, make sure that you go into testing. Let's go ahead and try another event. Let's click send example and let's see if that's gonna work. There we go. So it succeeded, the last event right here. And I think that we can see that not inside of the ngrok, but inside of our first terminal. There we go. Webhook with an ID of this user ID and type of user created. Perfect. So make sure you have these two things running. Make sure that you're getting this proper console logs. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and actually connect to our Prisma and create a user inside of our database every time our user has logged in using a clerk. What I want to do first is actually delete all of my users from my clerk dashboard right here. So I'm gonna go inside of my users here, I'm gonna find my user and I'm gonna delete this user. So we start from a blank slate, right? Make sure you have no users inside of your clerk dashboard. And then what we're gonna do is just make sure your localhost is running, of course, make sure your ngrok is running as well. What we're gonna do is modify this to create a new user model every time we receive an event of user.created. And we're actually not gonna need the ID like this. So you can remove this, just leave the event type and remove these two console logs. Let's go ahead and do the following. If event type is user.created, in that case, we're gonna have to update our database. So let's go ahead and let's import database from @/libdb, which is this little util which we created, which has access to our database. So now that we did that, let's go inside of this if clause and let's write await db.user.create. And let's write data external user ID to be payload.data.id. And we have this payload right here. So we're not going to be using the body here, which is stringified. We're going to be using payload directly. So make sure you don't accidentally use body. So we're passing the external user ID, which is the clerk user ID, to this field. And then we're going to pass in the username to be payload.data.username. Then we're going to add image URL to be payload.data.image URL. And actually, it's not image URL like this. It is image underscore URL. So the field is a bit different. You can visit the documentation to see how it exactly looks, or you can, I think you can actually see it inside of your dashboard here inside of webhooks. Let's go ahead and click here. When you click on testing and select user.created, in here you can see what you're going to get. So all of these things, and there we go, we have image URL. So that's how we know that it's with an underscore, right? It's a bit different than ours. So we're gonna match the image URL, and I think that is it for now. Let's take a look at our Prisma schema. So Prisma schema, we have ID, which is automatically created. We have username, image URL, and external user user ID. These three fields are required. This doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter for the webhook. Great, and I think we can already do that. So let's go ahead and try that now. So we can go, you can still work on localhost, so you don't have to use that URL. So just go to your localhost, right? And what I'm going to do before I try this is also run my Prisma Studio so I can look at my database in real time. So open a third terminal and run npx Prisma Studio. And that's going to open it on localhost 5555. And right now I have no users inside of my database. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue with Google and create my account. Make sure you've also deleted all of your users from Clerk. And now I'm going to enter my username, code with Antonio, and I'm going to click continue, and let's see if this is going to work now. So I'm going to go inside of my Prisma Studio, I'm going to refresh my users, and there we go. We are synchronized. Every time a new user uses Clerk to register on our app, we now have them in our own database, which means that we have their image URL, and we have, most importantly, the external user ID. So for other webhook events like user updated, this is what we're going to look for, the external user ID. And that's how you're going to update their image or their username, right? And the bio is null, that is correct. And you can, I believe, also take a look at here in the overview. There we go, we have the last event which was fired and it was successful. Perfect. So now what I want to do is an ability to modify my image URL, or more specifically my username, and I also want that to change inside of my database. So right now my username is code with Antonio. So let's go ahead and add another type of event here for user updated. So let's go ahead and do if event type is user.updated. In that case, go ahead and do await. Actually, first let's attempt to find this user. So const current user is going to be await db.user find unique, where external user ID is matching payload.data.id. So how do I know this is the field I'm looking for? Because that's what we stored when we created the user. So now I know, all right, this is how I'm going to find the user that my webhook is trying to do something with. And if there is no current user here, let's go ahead and return new response, user not found, and let's give it a status of 404, like that. Otherwise, if we have the user, let's do await db.user.update, where external user ID is payload.data.id, and let's modify the data for this user. So that can either be the username, which is going to be payload data username, or it can be image URL, which is going to be payload.data.image underscore URL. So make sure you add the underscore, the same thing we did here. Perfect. Let's try that out now. So we have our event ready. Make sure it says user updated. So my username right here is code with Antonio in the database. But if I go ahead and click on manage my account and click on change username and change this to something else and click continue, let's go ahead and refresh my Prisma Studio now. And there we go. My username is now something else. Perfect. Exactly what we wanted. And the same thing is working with the image URL, but I can't really show that because the URL is just a huge string, right? But the image URL is now also working. So you can also update the image of the user and it's going to be updated everywhere on your website. One last event that we have to take care of is if the user deletes their account. So let's go ahead and outside of here and let's write if event type is user deleted. Let's do await db user delete where external user ID matches payload data ID. Like that. Perfect. And I actually believe inside of this user updated, I think we can remove this. I think we can just do this. I think it's like exactly the same thing. All right, let's try that out. So now once the user has been deleted, our database should clear it as well. So in my database, I now have one user, but if I go to manage account, and if I go all the way down and click on delete account and confirm delete account and click on delete account and go in my Prisma Studio and refresh, and it looks like it's still here, and you have to refresh 2 times. So the webhooks are not exactly instant, but there we go. Our user has been deleted officially from the database as well. Let's go back to localhost 3000 and let's go ahead and create a new account again. So I'm back and let's write code with Antonio again. So I'm creating a completely new user. Let's go here, let's refresh. There we go, the user is back. Let's go ahead and try and change my username, something else. Let's click continue, let's refresh, and there we go. So our webhook is working perfect. We have synchronized our Clerk users with our database. That's going to be very helpful for us because we now have them inside of our familiar lib where we can access them directly in the database. We don't even have to use all the Clerk features now, which for this project is gonna make some things a bit simpler. Great job. So now that we have our webhooks ready, let's go ahead and let's actually start developing how our application looks like. So make sure you have localhost running. You actually don't need to have your ngrok running right now, except if you're not going to be creating any new users. So from now on, if you plan on modifying your user by changing the image URL or the username, deleting your user, or creating new users, you need to have your webhook running. So if you accidentally create one without, your database is not going to be synchronized with your Clerk dashboard. So what you can do is go inside of Prisma Studio and delete everything you have in users, and then go onto the Clerk dashboard and manually delete all users and then try again. But for this part that we're going to do now, we're not going to do anything like that. So you can just have your localhost running here. And let's go ahead inside of the app, and what I want to do is I want to modify my structure a little bit. So this page.tsx is going to be my main page, but the thing is I want it to be a little bit different. I don't want it to be standalone like this. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called Browse. And then inside, I'm going to go ahead and create another folder called Home. And go ahead and drag and drop page.tsx inside of that home right here. If this pops up, you can click OK. And now, as you can see, I have this weird unsaved file here. So look at your open editors and you should see page.ts in .next/types/app. So if you have this, just click on that and click save, and you can close everything, and make sure that you close this .next folder, right? So that is just cache because we just moved our root page from one place to another. But because of the route groups, what does this page equal to? Well, it equals to localhost 3000. Nothing has changed. It's exactly the same. We just put it in a couple of group folders so we can work better with it. Great. And one more thing I want to tell you. So if you had some problems with that next cache, with that weird unsaved file, here's another way you can fix it. Go ahead and shut down your app. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down both my ngrok. I don't need it now. My Prisma Studio, I don't need that. And also shut down the app. And what you can do is manually go ahead and remove .next and then do npm run dev again. And once you do that, .next will be created again. There we go. And everything should work just fine. So just in case for some reason you got stuck on that little page thing, it's not a big deal. Great. So now that we have that structure, let's go back inside of the browse right here. And what I want to create is a layout file. So go ahead and create layout.tsx. And let's go ahead and give this browse a layout. Let's go ahead and extract their children. Let's give them a type of React node. And let's go ahead inside, render a div, and inside very simply render those children. And you should not be seeing any differences now because we are not using this layout in any special way. Great. So what I want to do now is I want to create a navbar component. So I'm going to replace this div right here to be a fragment, and that is still going to be exactly the same. And then in here, I'm going to create another div with a class name of flex, h full, and padding top of 20. So I'm adding a little bit space here on the top, so our navbar has space. And then here, I'm going to render the navbar itself. And when we save, of course, we're going to get an error because navbar does not exist. So inside of this browse folder, create another folder underscore components like that. And then inside, go ahead and create another folder called sidebar. And then create an index.tsx, which is going to be the entry point for our sidebar. The reason I'm creating this as a folder and not as a component like sidebar.tsx is because it's going to have a lot of elements itself. And I did not mean sidebar, I meant navbar. My apologies. So we're going to work with navbar first. So go inside of navbar and let's do export const navbar. And let's go ahead and instead of div, let's actually use the nav element. And let's just write navbar inside and you can save this. Go back to layout, so inside of the browse layout right here, and import navbar from /components navbar. And when you save, you should have a text navbar here at the top. Now let's go ahead and give this nav a class name of fixed like that, so it's always at the top. Let's also confirm that with top 0. Let's give it a full width. Let's give it a height of 20. Let's give it a z index of 49. Let's give it the background color of a specific hex code 252731 like that. And let's give it a padding on left and right of 2. On large devices, it's going to be padding of 4. Let's give it flex, justify between, items center, and shadow small, like that. Great, so now we have our navbar right here, at least the skeleton of it. Perfect. Now inside of here, I want to go ahead and create my logo component, which is going to be similar to that auth logo, which we created recently. So let's actually go ahead inside of our app, inside of auth, in components, here we have logo.tsx. So let's copy that. Let's go inside of browse and let's go inside of the navbar itself and paste that logo inside of here, like that. Great. And now we can import that logo from ./logo. And no, I did not just randomly duplicate this. So obviously it doesn't look good now, as you can see. but we're going to modify it now. But it is going to reuse a lot of elements, so it was better to just copy it. It was easier. So make sure that you still have the logo inside of the out, but what we did was copied it inside of the browse, inside of underscore components, inside of navbar, right alongside our index. We now have the exact same logo here. Great, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove everything inside, right? But we're still going to need this pop-ins, and we're still going to need a CN here, as well as the image. But one more thing we're going to need is the link component from next link. And now let's go ahead and let's add link href to be slash like this. Let's create a div with a class name of hidden on mobile devices, but on large devices it's going to be flex like this. Let's give it items center, gap x4, hover, opacity -75, and transition. And now to actually see that element, let's go ahead and create our little circle here. So class name, bg, white, rounded, full, and padding of 1. And then inside of here, we're going to render our image. So make sure you have image imported, which is going to have a source of /spooky.svg. So the same thing that we have inside of our auth logo component, right? So make sure you have spooky.svg inside of your public folder. Let's give this an alt of GameHub, which is the parody name of our app. Let's give it a height of 32. Let's give it a width of 32 as well. And I believe that's it. I think that should work. So you can see now on small devices, it's not visible. But on big devices, it is visible right here. And when I click here, it's going to redirect us to the root page. Great. So now let's go ahead outside of this div right here. And let's add another one, which is going to have a paragraph of GameHub. And then below is going to have a paragraph of Let's Play. And let's go ahead and fix this by escaping it with this apos right here. So just replace that like this. And I will just zoom out so you can see this. There we go. So you can see how now we have a text GameHub and Let's Play below it. So let's go ahead and style this even further. So I'm going to go ahead and give this div a class name to use cn font.className like that. So we have cn imported and our font is Poppins right here. So now both of our GameHub text and Let's Play text are going to share that same font. Perfect. And what I want to do now is give the first paragraph a class name of text large and font semi-bold. And the second one, text extra small and text muted foreground. Like that. So let's take a look at it. And there we go. We have our nice little component here in the navbar. And every time user clicks on that, they're going to get redirected to the home page because of our link component. Perfect. Great. Let's go back inside of our index now. And what I want to do next is create our search input. So let's go ahead and write search like this. And if you save, of course, you're going to get a little error here. So let's go inside of the navbar here and let's create a new file, search.tsx. And what I'm going to do now is mark this component as use client, because this one is going to be an input which is going to have on change, is going to have a use effect, all of those things. And if you remember in my brief introduction in the server components and client components, all components which we create in the app router are server components by default. So we have to explicitly tell this framework that we want this to be a client component. So let's do export const search to return a div just saying search for now. Now go back inside of your navbar index and you can import that from not from Lucid React, but from /search like this. And now you should have a text which says search right here. Great, and it's even visible on mobile here. Great, and let me just show you one quick difference, which you can, if you're not sure whether your component is client or server, because you don't have to always add use client. For example, if our search component explicitly has use client written, and then inside of here we add another component, right? That component, let's say this is a new file, so another component.tsx. Then that component does not have to have use client at the top. So you don't have to write that. You can just do export const another component, right? So that way, the reason that works is because everything that is inside of use client is automatically going to become client from now on, right? But there is a certain way that you can also render server components inside of client components, and that's by using children. So this is the way where you can kind of inject a server component inside of use client. And I have a feeling like this will just confuse you now. So I'm going to stop myself, because we are going to have these examples and they are going to be clearer when you actually see the purpose behind them, right? But for now, here's one cool thing which you can do. So mark this as use client and add a simple console log, which says I am logged here. And now when you take a look in your inspect element here, and I will just filter this here, so I am logged here. There we go. You can see right here that it is logged. So I am logged here in my inspect element right here. But if I remove use client, what happens then? Let's refresh. All of a sudden, there are no logs here. But let's just add search here. The component is still rendered. So where is this log? Well, it's inside of our terminal, because this is by default a server component. There we go. You can now see the logs here. I'm logged here, I'm logged here, I'm logged here. So that's how you can easily recognize whether something is a client or a server component if you're not sure. So for now, bring back use client for this component, and let's go ahead and develop this. So what I want to do now is add a component from ShadCN UI, so do npx ShadCN-UI at latest add input, like this. So let's go ahead and wait for this to be added and do npm run dev again. And every time you shut down your app, make sure to refresh your localhost here. Perfect. And oh, I actually need one more package. My apologies. So also let's add npm install query string, like that. And we already have the button, so that should be it for this component. So refresh your localhost, and let's go ahead and import QS from query string. Let's go ahead and import useState from React. Let's go ahead and import search icon and X from Lucid React. So it's important that you can also import search from Lucid React, but obviously it's going to conflict with our component name. So you can either rename this to like search input, or you can rename this import to as search icon. Or what Lucid offers, at least for the version I'm using, is just directly using search icon like this. So that's why I'm doing that. All right, and let's also go ahead and import use router from next/navigation. So don't accidentally import it from router, because that's going to break your app inside of the app router which we are using. And now let's go ahead and import the input component from add/components UI input, and let's import the button component from add/components UI button. So we have both of those. Input we've added just now, and button we added in the beginning of the project. All right, so now I want to replace this div with a form, and I want to go ahead and give this form a class name of relative wfull. On large devices, we're going to use a specific width of 400 pixels, flex and items center. Let's go ahead and give it an onSubmit to just be an empty arrow function for now. And inside of here, let's render our input component. Let's go ahead and give this a placeholder of search. So there we go. Now you can see how we have a nice little search component here in the top. And now what I want to do is I want to do the following. Outside of this input, add a button component. And inside, we're going to render the search icon. Great, so now you can see how we have a big search icon next to this input. So let's go ahead and style this a bit. So give this search icon first a class name of h5, w5, and text muted foreground. Now let's give this button a type of submit, and I'm just going to collapse all of the attributes. So a type of submit, a size of a small, a variant of secondary, and I'm also going to give it a class name of rounded L none, like this. So I don't want it to have any borders on this side because I want it to flush with the input. So I'm going to have to do the same thing on the input, and obviously I'm going to have to remove this kind of a ring or an outline because it just seems to clash with what I'm trying to do here. All right, so now that we took care of our button, let's go back to the input and let's give it a class name of rounded-r-none. So now when these two meet, their roundedness is going to be equal and it's going to look flush with one another. And now let's give it a focus-visible ring 0. So we remove that outline, and we also have to give it focus-visible ring transparent and focus-visible ring offset 0, like that. So these three classes: focus visible ring 0, focus visible ring transparent, and focus visible ring offset 0. So now if you try, you can see how it looks very flush with one another, and if you click here, it's going to submit the form, so it kind of refreshes, but that's going to be fixed in a second. Great. And now what I want to do is I want to add some functions here. So let's go ahead and let's add our router to be useRouter, which we added an import right here. Then let's go ahead and let's add value and set value to come from useState and give it a default value of an empty string. Let's add const on submit here. Let's go ahead and give it an event to be react.formEvent HTML form element, and let's do event.preventDefault so we don't refresh our page every time. If we have no value written and user submitted it, we're just going to return, so no need to do any search if user hasn't written anything, right? And then let's do const URL is going to be qs.stringify URL, like that. And let's write URL to just be an empty arrow function, and the query is gonna give a term a value of value, which we are storing inside of our state. And let's also go ahead and add options to skip empty string to be true, like that. So things like this term are not gonna happen, right? So we're never gonna have a URL which ends like this because of this option. It's just gonna be like this, right? And now what we have to do is router.push and push that URL, because stringify URL is going to result in a string. So it's going to look like localhost 3000 slash, sorry, not slash, but it's going to have this query term and then value which user has searched. So that's what we're pushing to the URL. All right. And now what I want to do is I want to add that to this input and to this onSubmit. So let's change this onSubmit here to use that onSubmit function which we just created, and let's change this input to have a value of value, and let's give it an onChange to get the event, and uses set value with a value of event.target.value very simply. And you can already try this out now. So look, my URL is localhost 3000 now, but if I write test and press enter, you can see that now my URL is /term and it equals to exactly what I've written inside of my input. Great. So now I want to allow a user a way to clear their input by using this X icon from which we imported from Lucid React here. So first I want to define a function for that. So const on clear is very simply just going to call set value and empty it like that. And then what I want to do is go ahead just below this input here and add if I have value, go ahead and render that X icon like that. So you can see that now I have this X icon. I don't know if you can see it. Let me zoom in. So now I have this X icon, but if I remove it, I don't have it. And now let's go ahead and style this so it looks a bit better. So we're gonna go ahead and give this X a class name of absolute, top-2.5, right 14, h-5, w-5, text-muted-foreground, cursor-pointer, hover, opacity-75, and transition. And let's give it on click, on clear. There we go. So absolute, top 2.5, right 14. So this is going to position it exactly in this place in the input where I want. So let me expand this a little bit. So exactly where I want it, right here. Then text muted foreground, that's what makes it the same color as the little icon here. The H5 and W5 give it the exact size that I want. Cursor pointer makes sure that when I hover on this, it looks like I can click on it. So it's not just a pointer, right? And the hover opacity 75 means that when I hover, it has a little bit of an opacity, as you can see, and transition just to smooth that out so it's not too stiff. Perfect. So you can actually try and click this, and there we go. You can see that now this is empty, and we are not going to clear the URL. So we're going to handle that differently. And what I want to do now is go here and change this URL to actually lead you to /search. Because that's what we're going to end up with later when we create the search page. Right now we don't have it, right? So we can't really test this out. So I'm going back to localhost, and if I write test, I'm going to get redirected to 404, but my URL is correct. So just ensure that your localhost 3000 goes to /search and then uses that term. And you can leave it like this for now. We're going to work on that search page later, but for now we have a beautiful and ready component to do that. Great. So what we have to do now is go back inside of the index right here, and we have to create our third component, which is going to be called actions. So go ahead and render actions like this, and if you save, you're going to get an error. So let's go ahead inside of the navbar and create a new file, actions.tsx. And let's go ahead and export const actions here, and let's just return a div actions. Let's go back inside of the index here and import actions from /actions like that. And there we go. You can see that now in here next to my input, I have the actions right here. So let's go ahead and actually develop this actions now. So go inside of here. And first thing I want to do is turn this into an asynchronous function. We can do that because this is a server component by default, right? So if we added use client here, all of this would become client components, even if they don't explicitly have use client at the top. That's what I was trying to explain to you earlier, right? Because you're going to see patterns like that happen. But since we don't do that, then this is a server component. This is a server component. In search, we explicitly tell it this is not. In actions, we don't. So this is a server component. So we can make it asynchronous, and then we can get our current user from await, current user from clerk next.js, like that. And now we have access to the currently logged in user. So let's go ahead and do the following. Let's give this div a class name of flex items center justify and gap x2 ml4 button large ml0, like that. And then let's check if we don't have the user. So if we don't have the user, in that case, go ahead and render sign in button from clerk next.js. So add this import next to the current user, and inside we're gonna add our button from components UI button. So I like to separate my imports by adding the npm packages at the top, and then these packages which have the little @ sign, and then below that I would add like something which goes like this, right? Which doesn't have the @ sign. So I separate them by spaces. So if you're wondering why I separated this. All right, and so it's just a practice. It doesn't matter, right? I just like it that way. Inside of this button, write login like this. And now what I want to do, well, actually, I'll come back to this because we can't really see this right now because we are logged in, right? So we're going to have to come back to this. I want to give it a specific color, right? And now let's go here and check if we have the user. So you can write user like this, but what I like to do is turn this into an actual Boolean. And in order to do that, you can add double exclamation points. So not one, this will turn it into true or false, right? But this will turn this into a Boolean if the object exists, or if it is null, it's going to render this as false. And it is important to do that. I mean, nothing dangerous is going to happen, but you can get some bad user experience if you have a practice to not check what value comes before this end-to-end ternary, right? So I like to convert that to a Boolean. And now in here, let's go ahead and open a div with a class name flex items center and gap x4. And let's again render our button component. And inside, I want to go ahead and add a link component from next/link. So make sure you add this import as well. And let's add this link component. And in here, I'm going to give it an href to be dynamic. So /u/open template literals and write user.username like that. So that's why we needed our user to be loaded in full, because we need the username. And now in here, let's go ahead and let's add a clapperboard icon from Lucid React like that. And let's go ahead and write a span here, dashboard. And let's go ahead and give this button a size of small. Let's give it a variant of ghost. Let's give it a class name of text muted foreground, hover text primary. And let's give it an option as child so we can properly render this link inside. Great, and you can see how now we have this big dashboard button right here when we are logged in. And we are logged in because we can see this. So great, let's go ahead and continue developing this. So this clapperboard is gonna have a class name of h-5, w-5, and on desktop or large devices, it's gonna have a little margin here. And the reason it's only gonna have this margin on desktop and not on mobile is because this will be hidden on mobile and only appear on large devices, right? So you can see how now it is just a clapperboard icon, but when I expand and zoom out a bit, it becomes, as you can see, a nice little dashboard button. And when you click on it, it's gonna redirect you to 404, but the URL should be /u and then the last username which you modified when we practiced our webhooks of the currently logged in user. Great, so now we have that. And what I want to add beside it is the user button. So that's why I've wrapped this inside of a div so you can hold two elements side by side. So after this button here, let's go ahead and render user button from Clerk Next.js. So make sure you have the sign in button, make sure you have the user button and the current user imported from Clerk Next.js. And let's go ahead and give it an important prop after sign out URL to lead to the slash so it stays on our page here. So let's go ahead and look at this now, and there we go. You can see how now I have the control over my user right here, and I also have this button here. Perfect. So we finished our navbar. What we have to do now are two things. So first thing that I want to do is revisit our middleware, right? So make sure you save all of this, make sure your navbar is nice and here, and now go inside of middleware. And besides having this API webhooks, I also want to enable all users, whether they're logged in or not, to visit my root page, right? So just like on Real Twitch, I don't care if you're logged in or not, I want you to be able to see videos. But you're only going to be able to stream videos if you're logged in. Great. So when we added this, it's also, it would make sense that we go back inside of our app, inside of browse home page.tsx, and we no longer have to render this user button here. Instead, I'm just gonna call this home page like that. Great. So now if we try it out and refresh this and go ahead and sign out, There we go. Now I have just a login button here, and that's what I want to do next. So I want to go ahead and modify this button so it has a specific style that I want, which we're going to reuse a couple of times in this project. So let's go ahead inside of the components, UI button right here, and go ahead and find the button variants here. And find the last one, which is link, and now let's add one which we're going to reuse throughout this project. So let's write primary, and that's going to use the text primary, BG Blue 600, and on hover it's going to be BG Blue 600/80, like that. So that's going to be our style here. So let's go ahead back inside of our app folder, browse components navbar actions.tsx right here. And I told you that we're going to get back to this button. So find this one, which is wrapped inside of sign in button. And let's go ahead and give this button a size of small and a variant of primary, which you should now have access to. And there we go. Now this button looks much better, and when you click on it, you will be redirected to our custom sign-in page, and we didn't even have to explicitly tell it where to redirect. That's because this sign-in button comes from Clerk, and inside of our environment file, we've pretty clearly told Clerk what is my sign-in URL, so it knows exactly where to redirect us. Great, so I'm gonna go ahead and log in now to confirm that this is working. Great, so just make sure you didn't accidentally create a new user now if you have multiple email addresses. I mean, if you did, it's not a big problem, right? We're gonna reset our entire user database and all of our Clerk users a lot of times in this project because we're gonna keep adding some new models, so we have to make sure that we have a clean slate. Just don't worry for now if you accidentally did that, because we don't have ngrok running, meaning that our webhook is not working if any events are being fired. But it doesn't matter because right now we're just focusing on the navbar here. Great, so this is working. I have my dashboard button, we have our search right here. But one thing that I feel like it's missing is when I collapse, there is no way to redirect to the home page, right? So I feel like we shouldn't hide this entire GameHub parody logo, but instead we should just show a little element here. So let's try and develop that. So I'm gonna go inside of logo here. Let's see if that's gonna work. And I'm not gonna hide this, right? I'm not gonna hide the entire thing. So instead of hidden and LG flex here, I'm just gonna write flex. So now I should see the entire thing here, and I do. And instead, I'm gonna give this div, which renders the text, that dynamic thing. So let's go ahead inside of this CN here. And in the first paragraph, I'm gonna give it hidden by default, but an LG use block, like this. And there we go. Now I have a little icon here. So what we can do is separate these two items a bit, right? So we can do that by adding gap x1 or 2, is it? Which one? Oh, we already have gap x4. All right, we're gonna do it like this. We're simply gonna go inside of this div, which holds our image, and give it a margin right of 2, like that. And let's also give it a shrink of 0. Can I do that? So maybe margin right of 4, 5, 8, 10 maybe, 12. All right, 12 it is. And this is only going to be visible on small devices. So that means that I have to add on LG, MR is 0, and an LG shrink is just shrink. I think I can write it like that. So when I expand, there we go. Now it looks better. Now our mobile view clearly supports this button here as well. Perfect. So let's just actually try it out in mobile to see if it works. And there we go. It looks good. Great. We can now click on this. We have our search. We have our user dashboard. So, and this is the iPhone SE is the smallest you should aim for, right? So it makes no sense to go even smaller than that because this device doesn't exist. So I always try to go to iPhone SE, even though I think this is maybe unrealistic example. I think most people have larger phones, so you can even use like this ones, and it looks good. It looks good enough. Great, so we finished our navbar, and now we're ready to start developing our sidebar, which is going to be collapsible, and it's going to render a list of recommended users for both logged out and logged in users. Great job. Now that we have our navbar finished, I want to go ahead and create our collapsible sidebar. So let me go ahead and show you what I have running in my terminal. So I only have npm run dev running, right? Right now I'm not running any of my hooks, I'm not running ngrok or any local tunnel, because I will not be creating or updating any of my users. So I recommend that you don't do the same, and instead I recommend that you do the same and just focus on creating the sidebar now. So let's go ahead and let's revisit our app folder, browse layout.tsx right here. So layout is the perfect place to also put a sidebar here. And this is where I want to put it. I want to put it right above this children right here. So I'm going to go ahead and render the sidebar like this. And when we save, I'm going to get an error here that sidebar is not defined. You can refresh the page if you didn't get the error. And now I'm going to go inside of my components here, and I'm going to create a new folder, sidebar, like this. And then inside I will create a new file, index.tsx, and I'm going to export const sidebar and return a div sidebar. Like that. Let's go back inside of our browse layout here, and now we can import sidebar from, not from Lucid React, but from /components sidebar. So the same way we did with navbar. And now next to our homepage text here, which is our children, which is rendering the actual page, which is here, is also rendering the sidebar text next to it. So we're going to go ahead and turn this into an actual component. So the first thing I want to do is replace this div with another component called wrapper. So I'm going to go inside of the sidebar and create a new file of wrapper.tsx. So wrapper is going to be responsible for handling whether this sidebar is collapsed or expanded to its full width. So let's go ahead and let's write interface wrapper props. And I immediately wanted to receive children. And that's going to be a type of React node. And the reason it needs children is because this is what it's going to look like. So export const wrapper. And let's go ahead and pass in those children props here. So let's assign wrapper props. And let's get the children here. And inside, what we're going to do is we're going to return an aside element and render the children inside. Like that. So a very simple component. And then we're going to go back inside of the sidebar index here. And instead of using this div, we're going to use that wrapper, which we just created in the same folder level. So right here, and nothing should change. But now we have this little component which takes care of collapsing our sidebar. And inside of here, we can handle anything else. And this will be a server component, meaning that from here, we're going to be able to fetch our followed users, fetch recommended users and stuff like that, because this is a server component, so it has access to the database. But our wrapper later is going to be a client component, right? So it's going to have use client here at the top. I'm going to remove it for now. I just want to give you an image here. And the reason it's going to have use client is because it's going to have access to a hook, which will work with toStand, which is going to be responsible as kind of our global store, global state to detect whether it's collapsed or not. And because we're passing the children inside and not direct components, we can also add another server component inside, right, later when we create that. So that's how we inject a server component inside of what is going to be a client component. So that's what I was kind of trying to explain earlier, if you remember, where I stopped myself, because I thought that it's getting too confused at that moment. So I hope by finishing this, it's gonna get just a little bit clearer. So let's remove this and just write sidebar here. Make sure your wrapper looks exactly like this. And let's go ahead and give this aside some class names. So let's write class name here. and I'm gonna go ahead and give it a fixed property. So as you can see now, when I added that, you can see how it kind of goes one above another. And now let's go ahead and give it a property of left 0, so it's always on the left side. Let's give it flex, flex call, so all items go one below another. Let's give it a fixed width of 60, an h full property, a BG background property, and now as you can see, it has completely hidden our text which was here, which said homepage. So it's still here, it's just underneath all of this stuff here. So let's do BG background, border right, so it has just a tiny little border, so it's easier to distinguish where it ends. And let's also give this border a proper color of 2D2E35, like that. And let's go ahead and give it a Z index of 50, like that. Great, so now that we have this, what I want to do is I want to install a package called Zustand. So I'm going to go inside of my terminal here. I will shut down my app and run npm install Zustand, like that. So let's go ahead and wait for this to install, and let's do npm run dev. Perfect. So what I want to do now is create the store, which is going to take care whether this wrapper is expanded or collapsed. So I'm going to close everything, and I'm going to create a new folder called store. So I'm going to click on a random item here because I want to create that folder outside of everything. So just create a new folder called store, like that. And inside, create a new file, use sidebar.tsx. Actually, it can be .ts because we're not going to be doing any React inside. So use -sidebar.ts. And let's go ahead and import create from Zustand, which we just installed. Let's create an interface sidebar store. It's going to have a property collapsed, which is a boolean, so true or false. It's going to have a function onExpand, which is going to be a void, and onCollapse, which is also going to be a void. And now let's write export const use sidebar here to use that create which we imported from here, and let's give this create an interface of sidebar store, like that. And then go ahead and open parentheses again, and write set, and then go ahead and return an immediate object like this. So make sure you wrap it inside of parentheses, because if you did this, it's not the same as doing this. So this returns an immediate object. And inside of this object, let's give it some default states. So collapsed by default is going to be false. OnExpand function is going to be a function which calls a set, which we extracted from the props here. And what it sets is, my apologies, not like this. So open a function like this and go ahead and set collapsed to be false. And then below that, let's do onCollapse. Let's call set again, collapsed true, like that. There we go. So now we have our default state, we have our onExpand and our onCollapse function right here. So I want to go back inside of my wrapper now. So let's go ahead inside of app folder, browse, components, sidebar, wrapper right here. And now we have to add that hook inside of here. So you can do that quite easily just by adding const collapsed and then use sidebar. From store, use sidebar, which we just created. Let's get the state and let's just return all state here so we can properly destructure only the collapsed element inside. And make sure you do the export so you can actually import this. And when you save, I believe that this is not going to work. And in fact, we're going to get an error. So let's refresh here. And there we go. So useRef only works in client components. And you can see that it exactly points to this hook, which we just added inside of the wrapper. So that's what I said, that this wrapper component is going to have to be a client component. So make sure you add use client at the top of the wrapper here. And then once we have this collapsed property, we can dynamically change the width of this sidebar. So by default, it's 240 pixels wide. And then what we're going to do is dynamically change that if it is collapsed or not. So in order to do that, we have to import our cn package from libutils. And now let's make this dynamic. So I'm going to wrap the entire thing inside of curly brackets. Then I'm going to wrap the entire thing inside of the cn function. and I'm just gonna collapse this like that. So I want my default classes to be in the first line. I added a little comma here, and then I'm gonna write if we are collapsed. In that case, all I'm gonna do is change the width to be 70 pixels, just like that. And now you can see that it still looks the same, but if you go back to your use sidebar and let's change the default value of collapsed from false to true, and there we go, you can see how now it's just a small little sidebar here. Even our underlying content is kind of sticking out. So that's what we achieved here. So bring this back to false and it should expand like this and leave it at false. And now what I want to do is go back inside of the index here, and I want to go ahead and create a toggle element. So instead of this, I'm going to render toggle like this, and if you save, you're gonna get an error because it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead inside of our sidebar here and create a new file, toggle.tsx, like this, and let's export const toggle, and let's return a div saying toggle. Like that. Let's go back inside of the index and import toggle from ./toggle, and there we go. Now we have our toggle component here. And here's the cool thing. So remember how I told you that you can use console logs and look at where it logs to see whether something is a server component or a client component? So this wrapper is a client component. So you might be thinking, all right, everything we put inside is now a client component as well, right? Well, that's not true because we're using the children method, which means that we can inject server components inside. So if I go ahead inside of this console here and add a console log, I am logged here like that. And if I look at my inspect element, you can see that it's not being logged inside of the inspect element, but instead it's being logged inside of my terminal right here, meaning by that, because of that children thing that we did right here, this is still a server component, right? So I just wanted to demonstrate that quick thing, but it doesn't really, I could have chosen a bit of a better example because we are gonna turn this into a client component as well. But I promise it's gonna make sense once we add another component inside of this wrapper, which is actually going to connect to our database to load the recommended users here. And then you're going to see how useful server components actually are. But for now, let's go ahead and let's develop this toggle component. So first things first, let's mark it as use client as well, because it's going to have to access that use sidebar store, right? So let's go ahead and let's extract collapsed on expand and on collapse. And on expand should be with a capital E. And let's give it use sidebar, which you can import from store use sidebar. And in here, I want to get the entire state and just return that state like this. Great. And now let's write our dynamic label. So const label, if it is collapsed, in that case, we're going to tell the user expand. Otherwise collapse. So we are doing, we are giving them an action to do. If we are collapsed, the action is going to be, all right, you can expand this. If we are not collapsed, in that case, the action is going to be collapse this sidebar. So that's what we are storing here. So we can easily use it inside of here. So let's go ahead and change this from a div to a fragment like that. And first things first, let's go ahead and write if we are not collapsed. So if we are not collapsed, make sure you add a little exclamation point at the end here. In that case, let's go ahead and render a div with a class name of padding 3, PL6, margin bottom of 2, flex, item center, and full width. Let me just expand my screen here. And inside of here, I want to write a paragraph for you, like that. And there we go. Now you should have a little text here which says for you. If you're not seeing that, make sure that you did a proper ternary here with an exclamation point, and make sure that your use sidebar has collapsed false. So this should be expanded, right? So let's go back inside of our toggle component where we added for you, and let's give this paragraph some class names. So class name for this one is going to be font semi-bold and text primary, like that. There we go. Now it looks a bit nicer. And then what I want to do is add our button component, which you can import from components UI button. And inside of here, I'm going to add arrow left from line, which you can import from Lucid React, as I just did right here. And I'm going to move that to the top. And let's go ahead and give this arrow left from line a class name of h-4 and w-4. And now let's go ahead and give this button a class name of h-auto, padding 2, and ml-auto. And then let's give it a variant of ghost, like this. And there we go. Now we have a nice little toggle button here, right? So when we click on this, what's supposed to happen is this goes to its collapsed state. And we can do that quite easily because we have the function right here on collapse, right? So let's go ahead and I'm just going to collapse all of the attributes which this button has. And I'm going to add on click here to be on collapse, like that. So let's take a look at that now. When I click on this, there we go, it's collapsed, and you can see how that entire content now disappears, and you can just refresh your page to bring it back to its original state. Great, so this should now be working for you. And now we have to create an alternative state, which is when we are collapsed. So go ahead and click collapsed and make sure that all of your content in the sidebar disappears, because above here, we're gonna go ahead and write if we are collapsed. In that case, we're going to render something entirely different. So create a div with a class name of hidden by default, but only on flex on large devices it's going to be visible using the flex. Let's give it a full width, items center, justify center, padding top of 4 and margin bottom of 4. Then inside, just add a button which we already have imported and render arrow right from line from Lucid React. So I believe this was arrow left from line, and now this is arrow right from line, like that. And now you should have a little button here. Let's go ahead and continue developing. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this button a variant of ghost, a class name of h-auto and padding 2, like that. And let's give this one a class name of h4 and w-4. And it's not appearing for me, maybe not even for you. That's because on mobile devices, we're not gonna allow the user to expand this sidebar. But if you expand your screen, there we go. Now you can see that you have a little button here which indicates that you can expand it back. But on mobile devices, we're gonna hide that button because I don't want users to be able to expand because they already have a small space to work with. So I don't wanna cause any more trouble with our space. And now let's go ahead and give this button. So again, I'm just gonna collapse all of my items here, and let's give this button on click to be on expand, like that. So expand your screen, make sure you're in desktop mode, and now you should be able to both collapse and expand your sidebar. But keep in mind that on mobile mode, you should not be seeing the button to expand it back, right? So also one more thing that we're going to develop later is that when user goes from desktop to mobile mode, this is going to automatically collapse. So we're not going to leave them with this because then it's just weird that they can expand this on desktop, then they go to mobile and it will automatically collapse for them. So we're just going to do all of that automatically for them. Great. So confirm that on desktop you can expand and collapse this item. Perfect. So now what I want to do is I want to create a little indicator that when user hovers on this, it's like a little tooltip or a hint to tell them, all right, by clicking on this, you will expand. By clicking on this, you will collapse. And for that, we're going to use this label right here. We're going to create a component called hint. So we can wrap these buttons inside of that, and then we're going to render this inside. So let's go inside of our terminal, and let's add a package from Shadcn UI called tooltip. So let's go ahead and make sure you add, I believe, add tooltip. There we go. So make sure you add the add command as well. Now it is installing our tooltip, and you can do npm run dev again. Refresh your localhost. And now let's go inside of the components folder. Alongside theme provider, we're going to create hint.tsx. And let's go ahead and let's import everything we need from add/components UI tooltip, which we just installed. So we are going to need the tooltip itself. We're going to need the tooltip content, tooltip provider, and tooltip trigger like this. And let's write interface hint props to get the label, which is a string children, which are going to be React node, as child, which is going to be an optional boolean, side, which is going to be optional and have the properties of top, bottom, left, and right. And we're going to have align, which is also going to be optional and have the properties of start, center, and end, like that. And now let's go ahead and let's write export const hint. Let's assign the props, hint props, and let's destructure all of the props inside. So label, children, as child, side, and align. And then inside of here, let's go ahead and return our tooltip provider, and let's add tooltip itself inside. Let's give it a delay duration of 0. So I want it to immediately when the user hovers on this, I want to show the tooltip. And then let's add inside of the tooltip, let's add a tooltip trigger. And let's render the children inside, and let's give it an optional prop as child to match our prop as child. So as child prop is what we're going to enable whenever we are wrapping a button, right? So that way we're not going to have any hydration errors when it comes to that. And now below the trigger, add a tooltip content. And inside, we're going to render a paragraph, which is going to render our label. So now what I want to do is give this tooltip content a class name of text black and bg white, and I want to give it a side of side. So let me just collapse its attributes. And besides side, I also want to give it an align property of align, so we can always modify it if it's going to the left and we want it to show on the right, for example, or add even a little bit of offset if we want. And now let's style this class name here by giving it font semi-bold, like that. So that is our hint component. And now that we have this, make sure you save this file. We can go back inside of our sidebar toggle.tsx, and let's go ahead and let's import hint from components hint, which we just created. And first things first, let's do this for the not collapsed state. So this thing that I'm seeing here, so just refresh your page and you should see that by default, and wrap this button inside of the hint component like that. And now go ahead and give it a label of label, which we defined in this constant right here. So make sure you have that, and give it a side of right, and give it a property as child because it is wrapping a button. So now if you try, you should have a nice little indicator to tell the user what this action does. And we can do the same thing for when we collapse. So I'm going to wrap this button inside of the hint as well. And I'm going to give it a property label of label. I'm going to give it side right and as child as well, like that. So expand on your desktop, make sure you're testing this on the desktop mode. Now it says collapse, and now it says expand. And one more time, if you're doing it on mobile, it's not going to be visible. So that's not a bug. We're going to take care of that. Right now, we're just focusing on the desktop mode. Great. So we finished this. And now what I want to do is I want to ensure that the content, which you can see that it's kind of peeking from here, it's hidden, right? Remember that text which we have homepage also expands and collapses depending on the sidebar state. So that's what we have to do next. So we have to go back to our browse layout now. So let's go ahead and go inside of app browse layout here. And instead of just rendering our children like this, I want to create a client component, which is going to be a wrapper around our children. So that way we can inject server components even though it's wrapped inside of a client component. So let's add container like this and wrap the children inside. And if you save, you're going to get an error. So inside of your components folder where you have the navbar and the sidebar, just create a file container.tsx like that. And let's go ahead and export const container. Let's return a div here, and let's go ahead and give it an interface container props to accept the children, which are React node. And inside of it, let's assign the props, container props, and let's get the children like that. And then we can simply render the children. Then when you have this, go back to the layout and import container, not from Lucid React, but from /components container. So you should have 3 imports, the navbar, the sidebar, and the container. And nothing should change right now. But let's go inside of the container here and let's give it access to our sidebar store. So wrap this in use client, and children are still server components because we are using that children injection method. So make sure this is use client in the container here. And then let's go ahead and add our use sidebar, which you can import from store use sidebar. And let's just give it all the state information. And then inside of here, let's get collapsed like that. We're later going to add 2 more elements here, but for now, I just want to do this. So give this div a class name, which is going to be dynamic. So we're going to import cn as well. And we're going to go ahead and first give it some default classes, which is going to be flex1. And then if it is collapsed, it's going to have a margin left of 70 pixels. Otherwise, it's gonna have a margin left of 70 pixels on mobile, but on large it's gonna have a margin left of 60 like this. So go ahead and save that, and let's take a look at this now. And there we go. You can see how this says homepage right now, but when I collapse, you can see how it has a smaller padding. And if I go here, you can see how it has that padding by default, right? And now just to wrap this entire thing up, we're gonna do that automatic collapsing on mobile mode. And I'm gonna explain why did I use this exact values here in a second. First thing I want you to do is go inside of your terminal and install a package, usehooks-ts like this. Make sure you run npm run dev and make sure you restart your localhost, refresh your page. And then let's go ahead and let's import 2 things. So we're going to import useEffect from React, and we're going to import useMediaQuery from usehooks-ts. And then in here, let's go ahead and add const matches to be useMediaQuery. And inside of here, I want to add parentheses. Max width is going to be our LG breakpoint. Our LG breakpoint is 1024 pixels. So we're going to match that here, 1024 pixels. So this is going to be a JavaScript way for us to know whether we are in desktop mode or mobile mode. So what we're going to do now is add a little use effect here below this, which is gonna watch for that matches property. And besides collapsed from this sidebar, we're also going to need on collapse and on expand. And then we're gonna write if it matches, meaning that we are in mobile mode. In that case, let's go ahead and do on collapse automatically for the user. Else, we're gonna do on expand. And make sure you also add those 2 in here. So on collapse and on expand. Like that. And now if you look at it, see how it automatically collapses and expands, right? On desktop, we control that ourselves. So on desktop, we're going to allow the user whether they want it expanded or collapsed. But on mobile, regardless if they load the page initially on mobile mode or if they go from desktop to mobile, we're going to collapse it for them and we're not going to allow them to expand it themselves. So you can see when I refresh, you can see we're going to improve this even further. Don't worry about that little blink. We're going to fix that as well. But you can see how even if they go from loaded mobile and then expand the desktop, we expand it to give the user a reminder, hey, you can actually control these values. And you can see how our content here is following the exact width of the sidebar. So now I can explain those values here, which I've written. So margin left of 70 pixels when we are collapsed equals our sidebar wrapper here, where we wrote that when we are collapsed, the width of the sidebar is 70 pixels, which means we have to push our content by 70 pixels. And then, so this is if we are collapsed. And then if we are not collapsed, we do kind of a weird thing. right? Because I write this, but why do I write this again? That's because, let me remind you, we have to check if we are on mobile. So even if we are technically expanded inside of our store and JavaScript, we are never going to render that. And I believe we also have that here, so maybe we don't. All right. But we never wanted this to be loaded on mobile mode as ML60. I never want to push content that far away, because I know that on mobile mode, regardless if this has been run or not, it's never going to be able to be expanded, right? But this is what should matter for you here. ML60 on large mode, which matches the width of 60 right here when this element is not expanded, which when it is expanded, right? Great, perfect. So we have now our very intuitive and collapsible sidebar here. It works great on mobile. And what we're gonna do now is, well, kind of add some features here so that you can finally see those server components in action. So we're going to render the recommended users in here, which for now is basically just gonna be a list of all of our users from our database. And then we're gonna add some little loading skeletons, which are especially going to help with this. You can see when I refresh on mobile mode for a second, it's expanded. So it just looks weird. So we're going to go ahead and fix that now. Great, great job. So now what I want to do is create our recommended list of users here. So when users open this sidebar or when it's collapsed, I want to render a couple of user items here and a small label which reads recommended. So let's go ahead first and let's create an auth service, which we're going to reuse throughout our project. So I'm going to keep my services inside of the lib folder here. Let's go ahead and create one called auth service like this. So it's going to be a very simple service, which is going to be using the current user from Clerk and then fetch the matching user inside of our database. So that way we're gonna have the exact information we need, which we might not hold in Clerk, but instead hold in our database. So let's go ahead and do import current user from Clerk Next.js. Let's go ahead and import our database, and I'm gonna change this to use /lib. You don't have to, but I just like it more this way. And now let's export const get self. So that's going to be the function which we're going to use whenever we need to fetch the currently logged in user and also fetch what we have about that user in our own database. So first we're going to just get normal self from await current user. Then if there is no user, or if there is no username, we are immediately going to go ahead and throw a new error, unauthorized. And let me just not misspell this, unauthorized, like that. And then we're going to attempt to fetch the user from the database. So await database user find unique, where username matches self username, like that. And actually, we don't even have to use the username. What we can do is match the external user ID and then use self.id, because this self is the Clerk object and Clerk's ID is what we store in the external user ID. So this would be an even better idea, because usernames can change, but IDs cannot. And if we cannot find that user, it means we don't have them synchronized in our database. So we're just going to throw an error, not found. And then let's just return the user themselves. So this is what we're going to reuse throughout our project now, wherever we need to get the full user in combination with our database user. And now that we have that service, let's go ahead and create a new one called recommended service. So this is what is going to take care of recommending new users to the currently logged in or logged out user. So recommended-service. Let's go ahead and let's import the database, and let's go ahead and import get self from the auth service. And I'm going to change this imports to use lib. I like it more that way. You didn't have to, of course. And now let's write export const get recommended. like this, and make sure this is an asynchronous function. And first, we're going to do a very, very simple one. So we're just going to go ahead and write const users to be await db.user find many, and we're going to order them by the latest creation like this, and just return the users. And we're going to use this out service just a bit later, because right now I just want to make it very simple. What this does is just loads all the users inside of our database, right? And later we're going to use this get self to detect whether we are logged in or not. And if we are logged in, we're going to exclude ourselves from the list of recommended users, right? No point to recommend yourself to yourself, right? And if we're not logged in, we're just going to load all users. And we're also going to later go even further here and make sure that none of these users have blocked each other, because we're going to have blocking functionality as well. And then we're going to do a similar service for followers. But let's leave this recommended as it is right now. Just ignore that we're not using this for now. We're going to come back to that later. And now let's go back inside of the app, browse components, sidebar index.tsx right here. And below the toggle, let's add a div with a class name space y4, padding top of 4, but on large devices, padding top is going to be 0. So the reason we have padding top of 4 on mobile but not on 0 is because on mobile we're also not gonna have this toggle. As you can see, it's gonna be hidden. So we have to add a little bit of space there so it looks just a bit better on mobile devices. And then in here I'm gonna add recommended, which currently does not exist. So let's go ahead and just quickly create that. So go inside of the sidebar here and create a new file, recommended.tsx, and let's export const recommended and just return a div recommended like that. And now we can go back here and import recommended from /recommended the same way we did with toggle and wrapper. And now you should have this text which says recommended inside of your sidebar. Great. And now we're going to use this sidebar to actually load the recommended users. So let's go ahead and turn this into an asynchronous function. Ensure that you don't accidentally have use client at the top, because this needs to be a server component. And let's go ahead and give it a const recommended to be await get recommended from our lib recommended service like this. And now that we have these users, let's go ahead and pass them as data to the recommended component right here. So go back inside of here, and now what we have to do is modify the props so it can accept that. So interface recommended props is going to accept data, which is going to be a type of user which we can import from Prisma client. So the reason it has this user with the exact properties which we added in Prisma schema is because of that command npx prisma generate. So npx prisma db push synchronizes the remote database, but npx prisma generate synchronizes your local development instance so you can do stuff like this. Great. So it's going to be an array of users from Prisma like that. And then we can go ahead and match that here, so recommended props, and extract the data. And now you should no longer be having any errors when you use this recommended right here. Perfect. So now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this recommended is also a client component, because it's going to behave differently regarding depending whether our sidebar is collapsed or not. So let's go ahead and extract collapsed from use sidebar. You can import that from store use sidebar. I'm just going to separate them. And let's get the state and return the state. So we have the collapsed state here. And now let's add a property which is gonna decide whether to show the label of recommended or not. So we are only gonna show the label which says recommended if we are not collapsed and if we actually have something to show. So if data.length is larger than 0, otherwise no point in even telling the user that there is something recommended for them, right? So inside of this div, let's use that show label. And let's go ahead and render a div with a class name of PL6 and margin bottom of 4, and then inside of that a paragraph which says recommended, like that, and class name is going to be text small, text muted, foreground. And now if you go ahead and expand your screen, you should be seeing the recommended right here. And if you're not seeing it, it could be that you don't have the enough information in your database. So what you can do is console log data length. Oh, sorry for that. So data length. And since this is a client component, it's going to be logged inside of our inspect element. You can see when I log, and let me just close this and let's refresh. There we go. You can see that it says 1 right here. So I have 1 element in my database, and I can even confirm that by going inside of my terminal here. Besides my npm run, I'm going to do npx Prisma Studio like this, and you can see that I have 1 user right here. So ensure that you have a user in your database, otherwise it's not going to work. Great, so now that we have that, so on mobile it's still hidden, right? This is only going to be visible when we are not collapsed. Even if we collapse here, it's not going to be visible. So this little label is only visible on desktop and if the sidebar is extended or not collapsed, more precisely. All right, and now what I want to do is below this show label, create an unordered list with a class name, space y2 and px of 2. And I want to go over data.map, get the individual user, and then I just want to go ahead and add a little div here, which will render the user username like this and give it a key of user ID. And now you should have a list right here which says the username of your well, I only have 1 user in my database, so this is exactly what I have right here. I am that user. You can see that it says something else. That's what I last renamed my user when we were testing whether our webhooks for updating the user is working. So my name here is something else. Perfect. So we are successfully loading our users. And now what I want to do is turn this into a component called user item. We're going to need a couple of Chatzian components to create that in full. So I'm going to shut down my Prisma Studio here, and you can even shut down your npm run dev. You didn't have to, but I'm going to do it. And let's do npx Chatzian UI at latest, and let's add avatar, which we're going to need to create our reusable component called user avatar. And let's also go ahead and let's add a component called skeleton, so we can start doing some loading states here because we can finally load some data. So add this too, and let's do npm run dev again, refresh your localhost to ensure that everything is in sync. And now I'm going to go ahead and replace this div with a user item like that, and I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a key of user.id so I don't forget that. And we're gonna have an error that user item does not exist, so let's go ahead and create that. Inside of sidebar, create a new one, user item.tsx, and let's go ahead and mark this as use client, and let's export const user item here and return a div user item. So just a very simple component. Go back inside of the recommended, and then you can import that from /user item, and you should no longer be having any errors. Great, so now that we are here, let's go ahead and pass some more props to this user item component. So I'm going to pass in the username, which is going to be user username. I'm going to pass in the image URL, which is going to be user image URL. And I'm also going to pass in the isLive property, which for now we are going to control manually. So we're going to change it from true and to false. So leave it as true for now, because it's going to be easier to see how it's supposed to look like when the user is live. So it has a nice little indicator in the sidebar that they are currently streaming. So now we have to assign all of those props inside of the user item. So let's create an interface, user item props, which accepts the username, which is a string, the image URL, which is a string, and isLive, which is going to be a Boolean like that. And let's also make it optional. And now we can go ahead and apply those props, so user item props, and extract the username, image URL, and isLive. And now you should no longer be having any errors when rendering this user item in your recommended component. And now inside of this user item, let's go ahead and let's import a couple of stuff which we're going to need. So we're going to have use path name from next navigation. And we're also going to have to import cn from libutils. we're also going to need to have a button from components UI button. Let's also go ahead and import use sidebar from store use sidebar, so we know how to show this user item, whether it's collapsed or not. And let's also go ahead and import skeleton, which we just created, so which we just added from Shadcn UI. So this 5 packages right here. And now inside of here, let's go ahead and get the path name. Whoops, path name. Path name is going to be use path name. Then let's go ahead and let's extract collapsed from use sidebar. Let's get the state and let's return all state back. Let's go ahead and generate the href. So where are we going to redirect the user once they click on this user item? That's going to be to /username, like that. And we're also going to add a boolean is active, so we indicate to the user whether they're currently seeing the stream of this user in the sidebar. So we're going to do a very simple check if path name is equal to href, just like that. Great, and now we are ready to actually style this a bit. So let's go ahead and replace this div with a button, which we added an import right here. And what I want to do is give this a property as a child. I want to give it it doesn't need a role, actually, it's already a button. I want to give it a variant of ghost, and I want to give it a class name, which is going to be dynamic, like this. So let's write first the default classes, which is full width and height of 12. And then let's say if it is collapsed, in that case, we're going to justify center, otherwise we're going to justify start. And if it's active, in that case, we're going to give it a different background color of BG accent, like this. Great. And now inside of the user item, let's render a link from next link. So make sure you add this. And the href to that link is simply going to be the href, which we defined right here in the constant. And then inside, let's go ahead and open a div. And let's go ahead and write a class name, which again is going to be dynamic depending on whether we are collapsed or not. So flex item center, full width, and gap x of 4. And then if we are collapsed, let's go ahead and do justify center here as well, like that. Great. And what I want to render inside is the user avatar, which is a component we're going to have to create. So add a user avatar here. And let's go ahead and immediately pass in the image URL, which is going to be the image URL which we have from the props, username, which is going to be username, and is live. So we have all of these 3 from our props right here. And now let's go ahead and create this user avatar. And we're not going to create that inside of the sidebar, but rather we're going to create it inside of our components folder because we're going to reuse it throughout the project a lot of times. So inside create user avatar.tsx like this. And then let's go ahead and let's import CVA and type variant props from class variance authority. So we're going to use this package to create custom variants and sizes which users can pass, well, developers more specifically can pass, so we have a nice developer experience here. Let's go ahead and let's import a cn from libutils. We're also going to need a skeleton, and I'm going to use components for this one. And let's also go ahead and import everything we need from @components UI avatar. And that's going to be the avatar fallback, and the avatar image. Great. And now let's go ahead and let's just quickly create our user avatar here. User avatar. And let's just return a div user avatar. Now go back inside of the user item and import the user avatar from @components user avatar. And now you should be seeing a text which says user avatar like this. And you can already see how this is a nice button. And if you click, it's a 404 error. So just make sure you are here on the sidebar. So now we're going to change this to actually display the avatar of the currently logged in user. what we have to do is allow this component to accept these 3 props here. So go back inside of the user avatar. And what we're going to do is simply write an interface user avatar props like that. And let's give it a username, which is a string. Let's give it an image URL, which is a string as well, is live, which is going to be an optional Boolean. And also we're going to have show badge, which is also going to be an optional Boolean. So the badge is going to be the live badge on the avatar. So depending on where we're using that, sometimes I want the live, so little red live badge to display, and sometimes I'm not going to want that to happen. So let's go ahead and just assign this user avatar props like that, and now you should no longer be having any errors for passing these props here. But before we continue developing this, I actually want to create my avatar sizes here, right? So that's why we imported this too, CVA and type variant props. So let's go ahead and write const avatar sizes is CVA. Let's leave the first default classes to be completely empty, and then open an object and write variants size. The default size of this avatar is going to be H8 and W8, and the large is going to be H14 and W14. And now let's just give it some default variants here. So I wanted to always use the default size. Whoops, my apologies. I wanted to always use the default size unless user, or in our case developer, specifically tells us that they want a